G'day podcasters, welcome back to Season 6 of True Blue Conversations with your host Adam Bloom, the author of Easy Target, now available at adambloom.com.au. 8 years ago, after returning from 3 tours of Afghanistan and then gaining experience and education in financial planning, Warren Loudon teamed up with fellow veteran Dave Vaughan and started Loudon and Vaughan Private Wealth, founded with the underlying belief that every person matters and every dollar counts, providing comprehensive tailored financial advice and wealth management services for you and your family. Loudon and Vaughan will guide you towards your financial goals with integrity and transparency. Whether you're planning for retirement, investing for the future, or managing your family's wealth, they've got you covered. Visit loudonandvaughan.com.au or call 02 9538 2704 to book a meeting with Warren today.
Thanks.
G'day, welcome back to True Blue Conversations. Today I'm coming to you live from the beautiful Sunshine Coast, and it is absolutely gorgeous, and I've got a double veteran on today actually. This is I've been wanting to get him on for a long time, and we've finally managed to align and catch up, and he is a SAS and Australian Federal Police veteran. And what a story he has got to tell. So it's an honour to have him on. So Doug Sheridan, welcome to the podcast, mate.
Yeah, g'day, Adam. Good to see you, mate. And look, thanks so much for having me on and having a chat with me.
Mate, it's an absolute privilege, mate, to have you on. So, mate, before we get into your career, let's go back to a young Doug. Let's talk about you growing up, mate. What were you like at school? Do you have any brothers and sisters? And what were your hobbies?
Yeah, Adam, I was born in 1970 in Sydney, but spent the predominance of my primary school life in Coffs Harbour, then Charters Towers and Townsville before coming to Brisbane in my latter years of primary school, and then did high school in Brisbane. But I've got a younger brother, Mark, who's an absolute legend. He's 5 years younger than me. Love him to death. Call out to you, young fella. And I guess as a child, I was actually looking back on it, and I've been told by my mother that I was quite a quiet child up until I was about 12 or 13. It took me a long time to start gaining some confidence and coming out of my shell. And in fact, in some ways, I never really did until I joined the military.
Yeah, right.
At 19 or 20, it brought the confidence out in me, and the assertiveness that perhaps wasn't there in the first 2 decades of my life. As a funny sort of side note to things, my dad's a 10-pound pom with the predominance of an Irish background, I guess ethnically. My mother's Australian born, and they were divorced at a very youngish age. I was around 12 or 13, so that was quite a turbulent. So I had quite with the scenario and matters leading up to my parents divorcing, I suppose, and certainly after, I had quite a turbulent childhood right up until I was 17 or 18. But as I've later read, clinically apparently that's not an uncommon thing with Special Forces personnel, or certainly Army or Defence Force people, having that troubled background or childhood and seeking some kind of self-worth or brotherhood or recognition or sisterhood through sense of tribe, in this case being the Australian Defence Force, or in my case Army specifically. So
for you, were you academically gifted at school, or were you more sporty, outdoory type of person? What was that like for you?
Being a 70s child, I don't think we had a choice to not be an outdoors child. You would have heard the stories, on school holidays, as soon as the sun lights up and you've had your Vegemite toast or whatever, you're turfed out the door with orders not to appear again while the sun's still shining. Correct. So it was bikes and mates and dogs and bush and hiking. And so certainly outdoors, I don't believe there's much of an issue with my intellect in by way of being able to academically achieve. Common sense is usually there in me, but I didn't apply myself to school for sure. I love rugby and cricket as a kid growing up.
Good man.
Yes,
cricket. I'm a cricket fan as well, mate. So good on you for that.
Well, mate, we have a lot in common. I'm an absolute nut on that. I played a lot of indoor cricket, martial arts when I was a child. So certainly school was not in my in the forefront of my mind as a priority. It was sport and outdoors,
Yep.
and mates and playing and so forth.
So for you, do you have any relatives that had served in the military before you, or were you the first in your family to join?
I've got a maternal grand uncle that was in World War One. I know very little about that. My father was CMF in Australia when he came, so old school, well, the old citizen military force, which I believe sort of aside from reserves at some point, or eventually melded into reserves. My uncle, my dad's older brother, was in the Royal Navy. My grandfather on my father's side, that is my father's father, my grandfather, was in Royal Field Artillery in World War One. So, and of course my uncle-in-law, rest in peace, the husband of my mum's older sister, was a Air Force veteran of South Vietnam.
Yep.
And he spent a bit of time with the Americans around Khe Sanh, detached as a ADF, I guess, security signaller. So dealt with a lot of highly sensitive traffic through the Vietnam War, which came back to haunt him later a little bit, with intrusive memories and so on, but good guy.
And for you, so you joined the Army Reserve in 1987, and you've had that little bit of family that have served. For you, what was the main drive for that? What was it, trying to find who you were, or what was it?
For me, Adam, I guess I'd always been drawn to the military through my dad, through encouragement from my father and him talking about it, and certainly seeing things like Princess Gate in, I believe, 1980, and then the Falklands War in 82, that being holding or being spoken about and shown by way of print media and TV in my household, with my dad being from the UK. So that formed part of my upbringing and formative years. So I was certainly interested then. Who couldn't be? Watching those, the black and white footage, or may even be in colour at the time, of British SAS storming bloody Princess Gate and so on. I think for a young fella in the early 80s, what's not to be impressed about that? Rightly or wrongly, I guess. But as soon as I got older and was about to leave school or leave school, or had left school, I had the smarts enough to realise that I don't believe I was going anywhere fast. I had big aspirations. I had dreams of what I wanted to accomplish, and what that was, I wasn't quite sure, but I wanted to be, hopefully, some kind of life slightly less than normal than what was on offer, or that I'd observed going through school. But I wasn't going anywhere far, so I thought, look, if I join the Defence Force, this will put me on rails, it'll put me inside, give me a hard left and right of arc. And if I apply myself, which I knew I could, I just needed that discipline, I thought if I can do this, I might just make a fist of something and make something of myself moving forward.
And for you, so you joined reserves, and back in the late 80s, political correctness didn't exist as it does now. But what was that like? And was it, did you go parade like every Tuesday? How did it work back in the late 80s?
Yeah, reserves was every Tuesday, I believe. I joined, from memory, Charlie Company 9RQR at a barracks at Kelvin Grove. The discipline was very strict then. There's not too much more I can remember about that, to be honest, except for the fact that, yes, the discipline was very strict, i.e. the standard of your dress, your bearing, how you looked at parade, how you spoke to your superiors, and so forth. But I remember being 16, 9 months when I joined up, so that was all well and good until the parade shut down. It's like 2200 and the boozer opened, and no one was too concerned about giving me a beer as a 16-year-old in 1987, to touch on your non-PC point.
Yeah, right. And how were your parents when you said you were going to join up? Were they supportive of your decision to go into the military?
Gee, that seems further ago than it should, or I'm comfortable with. But I think my father was quite happy that I would find direction in some kind of vehicle like the Defence Force. I can't really remember my mother's reaction at the time. I think she was supportive, but certainly not a negative response.
Yep. So you join, you do the try before you buy, and that happens, mate. And then in 1991, you decide to go full-time. And was that because you were loving the reserve so much that you went, actually, I want to do this as a career now?
No, I'd actually started to lose interest, or I had lost interest in reserves well prior to that, and hadn't paraded much at all. It was more that I, in my own mind, rightly or wrongly, I wasn't interested in doing this part-time or as a piecemeal ad hoc engagement. I wanted to go full-time. I'd already had a false start where I'd been selected for RMC from school, so I'd prepped ready to go there. That didn't come off. I got cold feet. That didn't occur. So by 91, I think I'd tried to apply for Queensland Police, and they said I was just too young. Go away. That was their recruiting stance at that point, I believe. Go away, obtain some maturity, as in age, get older, and come back. You're far too young at around 18. So by around 19 or 20, when I decided I was going to go for Army, I actually walked in to try an idea I was either going to be an officer, or I tried for some special branch of the Defence Force.
Yeah.
And being clueless as I was, I've been told by asking around that there was clearance divers, I think there was SAS, but that'd be too hard, so I won't bother with that. Someone brought up something random like assault pioneers, was like the infantry special forces. I'm going, okay, well, fair enough. It gets funnier as I get older. No disrespect to any assault pioneers, because what a great trade that is in infantry. But I decided to go in as an officer. I was told that, or at least that was my view, I was told that I'd have to wait 6 to 9 months, so why not become a soldier first? And it's really easy, mate. You'll change over when you get there. Just tick another box and speak to your superiors. You can become an officer. We all know how farcical that is once you're in the system as an enlisted soldier.
So, what was the process back in 91 to join up, mate? Did you go into the recruiting office and join up, or because the internet was coming, but it was not like what it is today? So go in and say, I want to join the Army. How did that work for you?
Yeah, I'm almost positive I simply walked into the recruiting office in 91. I was motivated by the fact that the Gulf War had kicked off, or was about to kick off from memory. I walked in somewhere around early to mid-January 91. Mm-hmm. And with the view with a naive view perhaps that I think Australia will be joining the United States and the Allies, and we'll be dealing justice to some evildoers somewhere over in the Middle East. That's about all I think the thought I put to it. So I joined up, as we subsequently know, very few personnel at all were involved in that initial push in 91 from the Australian Defence Force, that is. But that was my catalyst to join in 91. Mm-hmm. Subsequently, again, I perhaps under a Labor government or a political master that wasn't overly concerned with having a robust, effective defence force, my recruiting became elongated, and I don't think I joined until around May. So it took me 4 to 5 months to actually get in and go to Kapooka.
Yep.
But as you say, there was very little. There might have been something, Navy had, you'll be wet, you'll be homesick and frightened, and I think we had the advertising at the time had leopard tanks with look what Davo's done and pulling shrimp off the top of a tank and cooking that outfield, and it looked wonderful, But that sort of television media probably pulled me in, and then I just walked straight in.
Yep. And
the rest was all face-to-face, that is nothing online or virtual in the recruiting process.
So you join up, you get in finally in May, and then you go down to Kapooka. What do you remember of your time at Kapooka? Was it the shock and awe, and what did you find you'd had reserves before, but was it in your face, the shock and awe back in the 90s? Because as you say, political correctness is still not existing. What was that like for you going to Kapooka?
Adam, I found it quite easy insofar as I'd given myself up to the process. In some ways, I thought this was my last shot at the title. Mm-hmm. This is to make something of my life. I needed the Army. The Army didn't need me, literally. That old bloody chestnut that was to come back and haunt me by many instructors. So I was open to the process. So whatever they wanted to give me, tell me, make me do, I was all over it. Very happy, very willing. I had no reservations about anything. So I was probably the ideal. I was a bit like Forrest Gump, mate. I was the ideal soldier. I'm willing to do what you tell me to do, drill sergeant. It was pretty much that state of mind. It was the days where you could get hosed down in the middle of winter, thrown in cells, the bastardisation was in full swing.
Mm.
I do remember getting crowpecked or receiving a blow to the head on the drill square because I'd basically done something incorrect in drill. And again, being a naive 19-year-old or something who'd given themselves over to the process so greatly, it wasn't even water off a duck's back. It was water off a duck's back. It was not an issue for me. I was willing to go through whatever I needed to. So I was up for the process and I was open to it.
So was that 12 weeks back then? You 12 for Kapooka?
Correct. It was 13 with one duties week.
Oh,
so
right.
12 days of training.
Yep.
Cop that one duties week in the middle there somewhere, I reckon maybe around week 7 or 8.
Yep. And then you do your tab of getting was it the yellow tab, and you move up the chain, and as you progress your weeks, and then you get to the final part. And did your family come down proud day to march out of Kapooka when you did?
Certainly, I believe there were certainly negative dynamics between my parents. So I believe my father just came alone with his partner in 91 at Kapooka.
Yep.
So that was a proud day. I hope it certainly was for me. I mean, I was proud of myself. Of the accomplishment,
of course,
and thought this is the genesis of something good now.
And so the next thing, you go to initial employment training up in Singleton, and what was that like for you? Because I've heard that is a whole another beast in itself. What was that like, getting to Singleton and then starting your initial employment training?
It was, I must say, given no previous experiences prior to that with soldiering, apart from Kapooka, it was tough. It was tough. It was relentless. It was cold. How cold Singleton can get in winter did take me by surprise. So it was cold. It was tough. It was relentless. The training, but again, life's about perspective, isn't it? And I just come out of Kapooka of 13 weeks of just getting pizzled with no time off, that is, or very little. Getting the weekends off, or most weekends off, was a bonus. It was almost like going to a very hard, physically demanding, mentally and psychologically demanding boys' school. So with all that came the camaraderie, the mateship. So the tribe was there immediately, and there were a lot of fun times involved with that. So it was a good experience, but it was tough. All those things that you later on, like even now, I think it's no issue if I have a bad night's sleep and I get an hour and a half sleep or don't, or 2 hours, you just crack on and you move through it. But remembering of being a young fella, and the first time I remember a line out of Hamburger Hill where he's been sandbagging all night, and he goes, "God damn," or "I can't believe, what's the army expect me to do? Not sleep for a year?" And remember one night not sleeping or getting very little sleep, and I just could not believe the feeling of how poor I felt, and thinking, how am I going to navigate this? How am I going to navigate a career of very little sleep at time? So just that, the first exposure to no sleep, and the first exposure to physical hardship, i.e. no food and so on. No matter who you are, when the first time you are faced with these deprivations, of course they're confronting.
Absolutely. And back then, were you allocated your battalion, or did you get to have a choice of where you wanted to go, or was it, no, you're going here and that's it? Talk me through that.
Yeah, I didn't go where I wanted to. So I was battalion enlisted prior to something called the Ready Reserve Scheme in the early 90s. So being a Brisbane boy, I thought, wow, this is great. I got it from memory, a battalion enlistment. So I was going to Kapooka, doing the School of Infantry at Singleton, and then I was coming back to go on the posted strength of 8-9 RAR. Somewhere through my recruiting journey, 8-9 went predominantly Ready Reserve, so I lost that option, or the Army, as they do, that promise we made to you, we're now reneging on that promise, and you were just going open-ended to Kapooka. I was then told I'd be going to artillery as an air defence gun number, which I thought seemed mildly interesting, but I wanted infantry. As it turned out, I did get infantry, and then got sent to the School of Infantry. There I wanted to go. My next preferences were 6 RAR. Simply, I mean, it's got a proud history, of course, but my thinking was I wanted to get back to Brisbane with all my mates where I've grown up, done high school, as one does. If I can't have that, I'll go to 3 RAR, their parachute. That sounds sexy, why not? Having no idea how how horrendous static line parachuting is at that point. And third, I put 2-4 RAR for no reason. Then, I'd run out of options, or I was past thinking. I was, I didn't want to pay any more thought past option 1 and 2. As it turned out, I got 5-7 RAR, which came out of the blue. But in retrospect, it was always going to be the case, I think, because something like 38 people graduated in my class from the School of Infantry, and something like 32 or 33 went to 5-7 RAR.
Wow. Yeah,
full stop, because they were grossly undermanned, their maintenance of level of capability, so their MLOC. And the platoon after us, the majority went to 5-7 RAR as well, including Matthew Locke, the platoon directly after me at the School of Infantry.
Yeah, right. And for you, because so you don't get your posting that you want, you march into 5-7, and is 5-7 based in Sydney at this stage? Was that so? You're moving down to Sydney. What was it like getting to 5-7? And as you say, they were under strength when you first marched in. What was that like?
Yeah, interesting. You bring up a memory. Of course, we immediately got stabbed for rear details. I think because I'm marching around early December '91. And we got attached to a support company. Whoever thought that was a good idea in the old days? The senior diggers with the leads or the new soldiers. And I remember digging pits out in the anti-armour range at the back of Holsworthy, and getting a Matic thrown at me, like literally thrown at me from about 5 or 6 metres away, and could quite easily killed me or seriously injured me. And that was just the way it was in '91. There was the levels of, you see dramatised versions of bastardisation in boarding schools in TV and movies, or even in, dare I say it, again, I'll go back to Hollywood versions of militarisation, dramatics like Full Metal Jacket or something, but it's not far from the truth. In some cases, the truth was far outstripped fiction. The levels of bastardisation or torment or harassment or abuse you put up with as a new soldier. But again, it was part of the culture, certainly in infantry, and it was just rightly or wrongly part of the process to toughen you up, see if you could what you could tolerate to become part of that tribe, your new tribe.
And for that, because it was a mechanised infantry battalion. So for people who aren't aware, what is that, Doug? So can you explain what a mechanised what I just said? Yeah, can you explain that for us?
Yeah, it's gone through a couple of evolutions since then, but you're right, 5-7 RAR was in Sydney at the time, hadn't moved to Darwin not till probably 7 or 8 years later. Mechanised infantry at that point were literally manoeuvre warfare elements, so infantry that travelled around inside armoured personnel carriers. So the carriers gave them manoeuvrability. It gave them some level of small arm and light shrapnel protection. So it made them mobile, and because they were armoured personnel carriers, you had more firepower. So you had 30, 50 cals, anti-armour weapons, and so on. However, you weren't an armoured force, so your timeline of living in a battlefield, if there were tanks on the scene or heavy armour, even medium armour, your lifespan was extremely short. Having said that, conversely, you needed armoured elements needed the mechanised infantry on the ground to protect them. And it's best to caveat this by saying this was '91, so we're still delving in the tactics of mechanised manoeuvre warfare from Europe. So the Berlin Brigade, the tactics of mechanised infantry rolling across battlefield Europe.
Yep.
So we were fully into those tactics. How that was going to help us in Australia, I'm unsure, those tactics, but I suppose someone thought that's the tactics of the day, and best case, we'd be given an injection of $1 trillion, and if World War III happened, we'd be transported magically to Europe, our 1 battalion to assist the Allies in the glorious fight against the East Germans and the greater Soviet Empire, or Soviet Union.
Yeah, right. So a lot of moving around, doing a lot of... So not a lot of pack marching in the early days?
Well, that was what the rest of the Royal Australian Regiment would like to think, but I remember doing an 85 or 90 kilometre route march in 92 or 93.
Yeah, wow.
So that was horrendous. So much so they gave us, I think we finished on a Thursday morning, they gave us till Monday off.
Wow.
We paraded. And that was simply something like Holsworthy Military Area, the old HMA or something similar, whatever it was called. We marched out on a Tuesday or Monday morning, kept going, and at around the 60, 65 kilometre mark, we stopped at night. Did an anti-armour shoot, because why wouldn't you? It's about all the sense I knew to it. Finished that anti-armour shoot, put our packs back on and marched back into barracks. Something like 80 or 90, and that was around 1992, 93, 94.
Yep.
Which the sort of marches they don't do anymore. And I've spoken to people from that era that they never did anything like an 80 or 90 kilometre. So it was someone's brainchild, some CO's brainchild at the time, and we can look up the battalion history books and find out who that CO was. But so there was a lot of it. It was still that. So we were forced to pay both masters, try and be somewhat competent as mechanised infantry soldiers, but also we're infantry after all, with that proud history of Australian light infanteers. So we were forced to maintain that skill level. To be fair and to tip my hat to the detractors in the Royal Australian Regiment, of course our priorities and attentions were split in training, so we probably, as a collective, of course we weren't as good as 1 RAR, 2 4 RAR at the time, 3 RAR, simply because our priorities were split. We literally had more technicalities or proficiencies to be competent at.
Yeah, right. And so not long after you march into the battalion, you get your first deployment, mate, overseas to Malaysia. Talk me through this.
Yeah, look, much ado about nothing, I suppose, Adam. I did 3 deployments to Malaysia. I did one in 93, the one you're referring to, which was part of the 5-power defence arrangement, which was Australia, New Zealand, 5 powers anyway. So let's go Singapore, Malaysia, Australia, New Zealand, UK. There you go, there's 5. As part of a 5-power defence arrangement pact in Asia. It was a CPX supported by a number of foot exercises around that. So we spent about a month there in 93. Subsequently, I did Rifle Company Butterworth, which I believe Nick Hill spoke to you at length.
Yes, he did, yep.
About.
The late Nick Hill, yep.
Yeah, correct. Rest in peace, mate. And Nick was, as you know, 5/7 RR as well. So correct. I went on that rotational cycle like Nick did of Rifle Company Butterworth in the 90s. So I did a deployment around 95 and then again in 97 to Rifle Company Butterworth, both for 4 months.
And you mentioned Nick, and you served with Matlock, who we're going to talk about later on in the podcast, and we'll talk about your selection together. And that, so I know you were telling me off air, there's a couple of stories that coming back and how you would treat fitness as eventually fitness for selection. But there's a funny story that I'd like you to share, mate, that about coming back off Christmas leave, and if you could share that one, that, yeah.
Oh, well, thanks, Adam, and I would ask the listeners discretion, or at least ask them to judge us not too harshly. We were soldiers of our era, but this story leads into, I guess, a technicality or specialty of my army career being sniping. Something I got heavily involved with and was a sniper. Something like I was involved with defence from flash to bang, elongated flash to bang for about 32, 33 years, and I reckon I was a sniper for something like 25, 26, maybe 27 years of that. And leading into that is the fact that BRL, which they now call, so whatever BRL stood for, by the way, the acronym, led into what they call now, I believe, reduced tempo period. So around Christmas, where 80% of the battalion went on leave for a long time, let's say 6 to 8 weeks. And I always used to think that if the Soviets, as we did think in 91, believe it or not, as archaic as it seems now, if they want to drop an airborne brigade in on us, do it on a Saturday morning, because no one will be under .08 in the whole battalion, or blood alcohol wise, or do it on BRL, because there'll be no one in any barracks anywhere in Australia. It'll take 72 hours to recall anyone. So it was a battle rhythm which I experienced in 92 and then 93, where being soldiers that we're infantry soldiers and we're directed to do things, and part of that is part of a forced PT regime which kept some level of combat fitness, and not a bad level of combat fitness to your basic infanteer. But you go away on BRL and every man and his dog, or let's say, let's pick a figure, the majority or 90% of infanteers would go home, get on fast food, do no PT, get on the beers, and they would come back horrendously overweight or comparatively overweight. So, if you're 80, you surely came back at 88 or 90 kilos on the way. So it was a battle for the PTIs and some of the section commanders in the powers that be. The first 4 to 6 weeks was horrendous on everyone. Because if you were a digger that let yourself go over leave, you were tortured with beasting PT sessions for 4 to 6 weeks until your fitness level caught back up with what it needed to be. Or the poor bloody, the wiser NCOs that had to run, who stayed fit and had to run this PT, or dare I say, the hierarchy had to put up with these slobs rolling in the front gate late January every year. So this was me in January, coming back probably something like late 80s, 90 kegs, and I was probably went on BRL around 78 kegs. Came back, and somehow, and I've spoken to others about this before, I take one step back. Being a mechanised battalion, we were always told by the rest of the Royal Australian Regiment, that is other infanteers, that we were somehow lesser skilled infanteers, lesser quality, and some of that, if you told you're bad long enough, you start to believe it, and that's an adage we know in life across all standards and levels.
Yep.
So I guess the majority of us believed that we were black sheep and we were a lower quality infanteer. So that translated into things like very few of us would try it for Special Air Service selection, being no regular commando elements at that time in the 90s. Nor would we try for anything that approached. We had no recon platoon at that point. Later we did recon company, which Nick was involved with, Nick Hill, but we had no recon elements. The sniper gatekeepers in the 90s were harsh enough as it was, and made it a very elite, difficult trade to get into. So the last thing you thought of as a 5-7 hour soldier was SAS selection or becoming a sniper. So whenever they call for people to do a sniper pre-selection in the battalion, which all battalions ran, to then choose 3 candidates to go on the main course at the School of Infantry, it was like cyclone training. It was, you couldn't find a digger in 5-7 hour when they had to go around, hunt people down and force them, as in literally direct them. You are ordered to go on the sniper pre-selection course, in most cases. And I was one of these personnel that got told, directed, ordered, you will go on a sniper pre-selection, or 90 kegs of me or something, thinking I'm a pretty low-quality soldier. And whatever I was 6 weeks ago, I'm even less now, because I've been on KFC and Macca's and VB or what have you, Powers Bitter, back in the day in Queensland. So it's the last thing I wanted to do. So somehow I bumbled my way through this. I remember we did a ghillie suit or yowie suit run. I was falling out of that. I was falling behind. I was unfit. At that stage, I smoked as a young fella as well. So no PT. So I was a horrendous mess as an infanteer probably in 93. But we had an old wiry, very, very well-respected sergeant that came down from 6 RAR that year, named Ian Rutherford. Sergeant Ian Rutherford, by way of 6 RAR, and his nickname was Mal. Well, I have no idea. So Mal Rutherford. And as he was one of the only sniper supervisors in the battalion, certainly the only sergeant sniper supervisor at the time, he was charged with running this pre-selection. Now, I remember it, I performed very poorly, as I remember. But for some reason, to my horror of horrors, on I believe it was a 5 or 10 day, it might have even been a 10 day, so a 2-week pre-selection. At the end of that, when I was in the BOS or the Board of Studies or debrief by the NCOs that ran that pre-selection, to my absolute horror, Mal Rutherford said, "Mate, I'm selecting you, you're going on the sniper course." And I was absolutely amazed. And I said, "Look, you've been observing a different pre-selection than I've been involved with, because I have gone poorly. I'm no good for this role, I have no aptitude, and I'm not fit." And he said, words to the effect of, "Mate, I've been doing this for a while now, and I see aptitude in you. You don't have a choice. I see something, so you're the man. You're one of the 3, and you are going to Singleton." And I was absolutely horrified at the time. But I bit down, and I guess life pushes you into corners sometimes, and you can either You can either put your knees to your chest and put your hands over your eyes and cover up, or you can fight, or you can move. And there's probably another way of expressing fight, flight, or freeze.
Mm-hmm.
And at that point, I decided, look, I've got nothing. I've got no choice but to fight. So what did that mean to me? Was it meant that I've got to get fit. So I started running, and I was running every day. I do 5, 10K runs every single day in preparation for this course. So I thought, there's many things I can't control. I can't control my aptitude necessarily, but I can concentrate on technical skills, trying to make myself as good as I can, and I can also control my fitness levels. They're things I can control. So I'll control those and worry about the rest later. And that was something like, that was early 93. The sniper course was run, I had to check my record of service long yesterday to find out it was run in July, August 93, and I passed that. Subsequently passed that, met all the had a few hiccups, as you do. In those days it was horrendously elite. 20 personnel would do it, 20 soldiers would do the course once a year, and 5 to 6 would pass, if lucky, and some of those on retest only. So it was incredibly elite, rightly or wrongly, and there were a lot of gatekeepers making it that way at the School of Infantry. But subsequently on retest, I passed that, and somehow I repaid the thought, the process, the faith that Mel Rutherford had in me, which became all the more poignant. That was July, August, and it became all the more poignant when he was killed in service in, I think it was 23rd of September 1993, as part of the TCV or MOG rollover near Pelata in Malaysia, where five 7-hour personnel were killed, and Mal was one of those. So he's always held a special place in my heart, Mal. In some ways, I probably almost glorified him. And they say don't ever meet your heroes, and I've never had a chance to meet my hero since then, Mal. So, and I've subsequently talked to guys about it who knew him in 6RA, and they've confirmed what I thought, in that he was a good human being, an empathetic human being, smart, intelligent, fit, tough soldier. So it's just interesting how one individual, I've had a few, as you have, Adam, talking about you're a mentor off air before, how one person can have such a pivotal and impactful influence on your career.
Absolutely.
As Mel did.
Yeah, and for you, mate, and any young listener out there and I mentioned in the podcast that I recorded yesterday, and it was something that the Navy veteran brought up as well, Ash, and he said that mentors play a massive role in your life. They can shape who you are and give you direction and purpose, and as you and see something in you that you don't see in yourself, and it from that, then do you feel that started to give you more confidence in moving forward, and it, as you say, it shaped the rest of your military career?
It did, and it's amazing the levels that someone's faith can have in you. So much so that, given the Mal Rutherford experience, is that he said what he said. It motivated me to be good enough to pass, just because no one ever passed that course easy, not that I ever saw, and then repay that faith, but still think, yeah, you saw a bit of aptitude, but I was a bit lucky to pass that. So you still don't want to give yourself over to the full belief. And we talk about, and you probably had many people talk about, I've heard people like Harry Moffat talk about the imposter syndrome, and he's not alone there, so you're always willing to doubt yourself. But to answer your question, Adam, it certainly did, whether it was subsequent to me passing that course or for whatever reason, only a couple of months later from that August, somewhere around the time I remember being, our whole battalion was mobilised to do the funeral arrangements for the 5 soldiers, and I'm a bit ashamed to say that I was the honour guard for one or two of the killed in action. I can't remember whose individuals those were, because they were predominantly senior soldiers, and I was still a new guy, a lead. Didn't know them. They were from a different company, I believe Bravo Company, Charlie or Bravo Company. So I did those funeral arrangements as part of the battalion formalities, and rightly so. But with that newfound direction and confidence, I was chosen as the only regimental or infantry signaller from 5-7RA to be chosen to go on the signals deployment to Western Sahara in 93, which is a largely forgotten UN mission for the Australian Army. There were 5 contingents over a number of years there, from somewhere around 91 to 94. And we were the last contingent, I believe, 5th Australian service contingent, and the only one that was thrown open to non-signals corps personnel. I take it that we were political. We were the political inclusions for that tour. Someone had to win somewhere. That why does SIG Corps get this tour? So there were 2 infantry personnel, one being myself and one from 3RAR. There were 2 artillery regimental signallers, so artillery SIGs, and I'm going to say transport. No, armoured corps, I believe. So 2 armoured corps, 2 artillery, 2 infantry. And that gave me the confidence to be in an all-corps environment, and for the first time, all-corps army environment, but females. And not that had much to do with the confidence, it's just that I was representing my corps and my battalion in an all-corps environment on an international stage as a private, and it was rank heavy. So when I say that, what I mean by that is there were a number of 1 officer class 2s, a CO who was at the head of it, like a 45 service contingent, a WO1 RSM, but I reckon half a dozen WO2s, 10 sergeants, even more corporals. So it was certainly rank heavy. So that gave me the confidence, I guess, to carry myself in that environment and perform. And I got a commendation for that, a CO's commendation at the end of that tour.
Yeah, right. And
so I think that Mal's action certainly contributed to that flow-on effect, which was only 6 months later.
And for you, as you said, you had the deaths in the battalion, and was that really the first time for you, and it wouldn't be the last going forward into, the rest of your career, but was that really the first time that you'd been exposed to, the army, like, this is like what we do is dangerous, and this can happen, that we can lose anyone at any time?
Yes, and it was shock, because I don't think I was young and naive, sure, but it was never on my radar that for people to die in training. You talked about it, but kids get told fairy tales as well. Doesn't mean they necessarily believe them. But 5-7R had lost 1 or 2 in Asia prior to that, in Malaysia, through heat illness and so on. We'd lost those 5. Subsequently, perhaps 2 or 3 years later, we lost, I think it was Brady Taylor, a corporal that in an APC rollover at Holsworthy that was crushed in the turret. And we had a number of, so through that 90s period, it wasn't, from Malaysia onwards, it wasn't uncommon, unfortunately, to see those training deaths. So to answer your question, mate, it was a shock initially, and then something you unfortunately started to become familiar with, if not uncomfortable still, of course.
And for you, so you joined at a time that was peacetime army, and it would ramp up going forward to the point that it just was just crazy. 20 years, absolutely our busiest tempo in history of deployments. You, in 97, you decide to go for selection for the SAS, and where did that come from? Do you think it was because of what happened with Mal and passing the sniper course? Where did that come from to go, well, I'm going to have a crack at this and really see if I can get into the SAS? Where did that come from?
I'm glad you brought that up, because prior to talking this through, I'd never really... I'd seen the Mal Rutherford experience as I've just described it, but I didn't actually connect the dots that it may have been the genesis of the move forward in my career. And you're probably right, now that it's pointed out to me, because I'm not that bright sometimes, mate. It takes me a while to join the dots. From that point, it was a subsequent escalation of skills and achievements in the regular army, certainly the Royal Australian Regiment. I won a few mil skills, both as a soldier and as a section commander. I was student merit on my sub-2 for corporal course, did very well on my mortars, my signallers course, the sniper course I passed. That's all I'll say about that, I passed. I went very well on my subject 1 for corporal. Matty and I did dog squad, went exceptionally well defied all odds and beliefs. As a mechanised infantry section, we went very well in the Duke of Gloucestershire Cup, the infantry wide competition in 1996. I thought I went very well in the Butterworth tours. I won a multi-nation section mill skills comp in Malaysia. So it was onwards and upwards. Everything, I found that I suddenly, out of nowhere, I'd sparked this natural aptitude to be a soldier, which wasn't apparent prior to that, I believe. I was good enough, a bit above average, but no more than that. But the Mal Rutherford experience probably started that snowball downhill, start gathering size and mass, speed equals momentum. So something like that anyway. So I think you're probably right, mate.
And for you, how did you mentally prepare for selection? Like, I know back then it was still that secretive, what's going on over there. It's the elite SAS. And for you, like, was there books around, and like, how did you mentally and physically prepare to go on selection?
Yeah, look, interesting. I guess, Adam, we're talking 1997, so there's certainly no online media really. There might have been some kind of early form of DPN, intranet perhaps, but probably not. I think there were closed circuit terminals, so to speak, within each battalion, or each unit. So I got a posted handbook, literally a pack that arrived in the mail through the army system after I'd applied to SASR, and it was literally a pack saying this is what you do. It probably had 3 A4 pages of printed psychological wisdom back in 97, a reading list of, as it would have been then, of high performance psychology or something similar, written by, the New York Yankees coach or something as relevant to SAS selection in Australia at the time or something like that, and a 13-week program. So I figured I was lucky. I consider myself fortunate in the run-up I was allowed to have professionally to selection, and also having Matlock as a mate, as company, someone to keep me honest to the process. So I mentioned before I'd done a couple of RCBs, that Duke of Gloucestershire Cup, coming right into the acute time space of doing selection. I then, prior to that, the battalion was most kind to me and made me run a sniper course in the battalion, one of the first ones that was decentralised from the School of Infantry in 97. So working 7 days a week, 11, 12-hour days, and I was still forcing in. I'd ride to work, 10Ks to work, 10Ks back. I ensured I did all my 13-week SAS selection PT sessions twice a day. Matt kept me honest there. I dragged him along. If I had to do it, so did he. So I used him as a general skills instructor on the sniper course. So going into selection, I was already banjoed, as in I was tired. I was used to no sleep. I was used to getting mucked around, physically tired. I think I had the course finished out a week's rest, and then I went straight into selection. So I went on, rested enough, and I was in a good space. I was battle fit. I was pack fit enough. I'd just been messed around for months on end by the battalion. Worked long hours, had very little sleep, didn't eat well or enough. So I was right in that space. I was conditioned to get mucked around on selection. So when I went on selection, it was simply, the mindset was, I'm not going off. There's only 2 ways I'm leaving. Well, one way, and that's horizontal. If that's with the heartbeat or otherwise, so be it. But I didn't give myself permission, is probably a modern way of putting it. I didn't allow myself or give myself permission to pull off. And
for that, because I want to touch on that, because as you said at the start of the podcast, the doubt was there. It was ingrained into you with the 5-7 don't go and do these. Like, what are you doing going to? You're not as good as the other battalions. And I say that to you as talking to you, and I mean no disrespect at all.
Yep.
That must weigh heavily. That you're trying to do something that is not. It's not the norm for 5-7 men to do, and how many went on selection with you from the battalion?
Yeah, there was 3 the year I did it. To answer your question, what gave me the feeling that I could, the confidence that I could attend, I suppose, is There was 2 individuals, I think they did separate selections, maybe, 95 and 96, a guy called Guy, funnily enough, and another guy, Shane, who was a good mate of mine. I actually did the sniper course with him in 93, and he was he and I passed that course, and the other guy, Scott, didn't, from 5-7 RA. So we picked up 2 on that sniper course. So, or Gibbo had done the one the year before, something like that. I think he'd done mine. In fact, he had done mine. So what I mean by that is 2 guys had passed already, one in 95, one in 96. So there was living proof that it can occur. Mind you, there were probably a dozen went every year. So there was, for those 1 each year, there were probably 11 that didn't. And there was an odd scenario that developed, at least in 5-7 RAR in the 90s, that it was almost a resume builder to do selection. Didn't have to finish it, but then you could trade off that a little bit, like, you know, oh, look at Davo, he did SAS selection. Oh, you know, didn't finish it, but wow, you know. So it was almost a resume builder. So guys were going on with my belief and my observation, the guys went on with no intention of ever finishing it, just to say that, so they could say they've done it. So big fish in a small pond that was actually rather large, the Royal Australian Regiment Infantry Corps or Regiment, but so they pull off, come back in 3 days, you know.
Because I know when I spoke to Nick about it, he said there was only very few that either went SF and himself going down the commando route and you guys going the SF, and he did speak about Matty and that, as you say, it wasn't a normal thing. And so you get there, mate, selections, and with that, it's intimidating getting to Swanbourne. I've from all the guys that I've spoken to that you head out, and was looking back now, was selection what you thought it was, or was it harder than what you had imagined?
It was harder than I imagined. I did my selection with Matt and another guy called Nick, who was a long-time regiment soldier, transitioned out of defence as a warrant officer recently. It was worse than I thought. I remember saying to Matt and him saying to me, how hard can this be? It's just a load of dog squads back to back. Dog squad went for a week or 10 days, just bloody 2 or 3 of those together. How hard is it? It's just longer. But we were wrong. It was horrendous. The Special Air Service selection course has a brilliant way, at least it did in 97, of making you feel like it's continually going to end in the latter stages. It's going to end before it actually does. Calling it psychological mind games is underestimating. It's underspeaking it, understating what it was. You literally, the way they do it is you felt like you were on the cusp of it ending, and then it didn't. And that certainly happened to me. And I've said before that I remember finishing a stand, and I've come off, and I ran the stand, I was given leadership of that stand, and a directing staff member said to me, "Hey, Shero, it looks like you've got the look of a man that in the spring, and you've got the spring in your step of a man that looks like this is about to finish." And I thought, right, I've got you. You've unmasked yourself because you've called me Shero first time. You've got familiar and personal, and you've had a joke with me. Yep, I'm right. Bloody oath, I'm right. I wasn't right. It went for another 4 or 5 days, and that was the worst part of my selection course, is picking myself up, because, funnily enough, it was, sure, they'd said it, but I'd given the indication. I'd done it to myself. I'd let myself believe prematurely.
So for that, how pivotal? Because I know selection is it's your own. You're in the hurt locker yourself. Was Matt? Could you turn to him and say, I'm in the struggle here, or is it just pure? You can't talk to other guys that are going on selection. How is that for you? Like, could you actually say? Could you draw inspiration from him, or?
The short answer is yes, but only by looks. We were in different training sections. So him and one other guy, one other guy I'd gone through Kapuka with, funnily enough, and he'd gone to 1 RAR. I'd been through Kapuka and Singleton with him. He'd gone to 1 RAR. By pure chance, he turned up on selection.
Right.
So we were good mates, hadn't seen each other for 5-6 years. And in fact, there's another guy, so there was 2 or 3. So that, including Shane, who I mentioned, even though he'd done it the year before, that Kapuka platoon, there's 4 or 5 SAS blokes that came out of that one platoon, 7 Platoon Charlie Company 91 Recruit Training Battalion. So the short of it is, this guy turned up along with Matt, and so it was just the ability to trade glances of mutual respect and encouragement certainly helped.
So for you, everyone I've spoken to, demarcation, was that the toughest point for you on selection? And did you ever feel, was there ever a chance that you were going to pull off?
Yeah, I guess moving through the early parts, and now we're into like day 10 to 12, moving into what they called Happy Wanderer. That was my most, I guess, the most fond, or part of the course that I think of most fondly, because I was alone with my thoughts, and all I had to do was perform. All I had to do was race the clock. It was like a game of excellent row gaining. It was excellent. Me against myself, how many checkpoints can I do? How far can I go? How fast can I navigate successfully? So efficiency versus effectiveness, efficacy. And I loved it. There was no one breathing down my neck. All I had to do was just navigate and go fast. Loved it. Lucky Dip was different again, one of the final phases, or the final phase, where it's a treadmill of no sleep, no food. And that was another shock I became used to later, but I'd been on survival exercises before, and one where we probably didn't eat for 3 or 4 days. That was one thing, but for the most part, half of that was static, so we weren't expending energy, we weren't working. But on selection, we were worked and gassed, and we got no sleep or very little, enough to make you feel worse. So 45 minutes, get your head down, and then woken up. So not 20 minutes where you can have a power nap. 45, we start to potentially
deep sleep. Yep.
Start towards REM sleep, deep sleep, and then you'd be woken up and you have a thumping, disgusting headache. Pull yourself up and move again, and you'd be getting that maybe once, best case twice in a 24-hour block, or not best case, worst case. It came to the point where I was, and very little eat, and it came to the point where I was actually dreading going to sleep, conversely, so I knew I'd be woken and feel worse if that was possible. And not so much in this phase where we didn't eat, but previously I started to dread meal timings as well, because, the lethargy you get after you have a meal, and because you're so hungry you'd eat a lot, and then you would have to try and pull yourself out of this tired lethargy after it. So there was nothing pleasant about even the pleasant aspects, i.e. a bit of sleep and a bit of food. But it's a well-designed course, and it tests men for the ultimate challenge of leading out defence of our country, I guess.
And how many started, mate, and how many finished the course when you actually got through? And was it 3 weeks, the selection back then when you did it in 97?
It wasn't then, and I've heard different podcasts here, and people that are wiser than me and more knowledgeable and spent more time in the regiment, that it's always been 3 weeks. I didn't believe it had. And if you read Phantoms of the Jungle or Phantoms of War, it states at least since 1SS or 1st SS Squadron that they have had differing times. So to answer your question, I thought it was about 23, 24 days. So just over this, close enough to 3, just over. Yeah.
And for high attrition rate on your course that you can remember back in 97?
I remember the 150 panel because I had the brassard on my arm, 150.
Wow.
So I seem to remember when I turned up, there were a few empty spaces here and there. People that were ill, sick, injured, lacked the bottle to actually turn up on the day, whatever, missing in action. So probably somewhere, I would guess, if I had to, around 138, high 130s, close 140. From memory, I think about 27 finished.
Wow.
24 was selected. And keeping in mind, that's just the start of the reinforcement cycle. We probably lost close to half of that again. So I had to, from memory, I think that fully qualified beret operators, 18 months, 2 years later, out of that, there was probably 14.
Wow.
No more than 16, I wouldn't think, from that 24.
Yeah, right. Well, we'll talk about that in a minute, your Rio cycle, and I want to talk about, because you just mentioned a really good point, and I want to bring this up to the listeners out there, imposter syndrome. And the imposter syndrome of, like you said, some didn't have the bottle to turn up on the day. It would be intimidating, mate. You're going, this is totally, you're trying out for the most elite unit in the Australian Defence Force. That would be, did you ever fear or have that imposter syndrome, I don't belong here, or that you can remember looking back now on reflection?
When I passed selection, most certainly. So when I finished selection and then was subsequently selected, in my Rio cycle, certainly, most certainly. During selection or approaching selection, no, as we detailed, because I just didn't give myself permission. I knew I was tough enough I thought I was tough enough to finish it, all things being equal. And that was something I touched on earlier, Adam. I try to, in my most stressful moments nowadays, certainly when I'm trying to perform to a high standard, concentrate on what you can control. So preparation, process, concentrate on what you can control, and keep to the fundamentals. Do the fundamentals well, and if you can achieve all 3 or 4 of those things, you're well on the way to succeeding.
And I've spoken to a few others on selection, mate, that they say selection is just the first peak in the mountain of getting you're glad you've passed selection, but then that's the start of the long journey to eventually get your beret. And for you mentioned the Rio cycle. What was the hardest part of Rio for you? And I know it's changed over the years now. And for you to become fully beret qualified back then, what was the Rio cycle?
Yes, it was a number of initially you had to get green roles qualified, so you could deploy in a green roles like a war environment. So you would do the bare. Sounds like I'm approaching from the wrong angle, but it's true. You did the courses to make you barely viable to be an asset in a war scenario. So that meant you had to do a patrol course, so to prove that you could exist in the jungle, in the bush, in rural environment as an SS soldier, and live and support your mates so they could live and achieve the mission. From there, you had to show you had apart from just being a gunfighter, you had a skill that would offer a variation to the patrol. In my case, it was a patrol medic, what they call a patrol advanced first aider, now PAFA, or it may have even changed again. From there, you then had to be able to have an insertion, had to be able to do a basic insertion, so they could kick you out, kicking and screaming at 1,000 feet, to land on the ground like a sack of spuds. So that's insertion. So now we've got vehicle air. You can operate as a patrol in the rural or jungle or close country environment. You can contribute, as in my case, a medic. And from memory, that was almost all there was. And then you got your beret. But that makes you just an absolute basal operator at a basal level, your basics. So from then you move into more advanced skills, your language courses, your roping, your air rappelling, survival courses, resistance to interrogation. You start to move into counterterrorism skills such as fast driving. Because I broke my leg on my para course, subsequently I got the opportunity to do an extra patrol skill, so I became a patrol communicator. On top of that as well, of course, you then do what was the hardest course I've ever done in the Army, virtually ranked equal with my sniper course. My basic sniper was my advanced close quarter battle. They've got another name for it now, but by all accounts, it's as difficult and as stressful. I reckon I aged over about something like an 8 to 10 week period, or 6 to 8 weeks. I think I aged 15 years on that course. Doesn't hold many great memories, and the reason I say that is I've never felt so constantly stressed and on edge and forced to perform at the absolute extremity of my skill level. So very, very stressful. A number of people were removed through safety issues or just lack of performance. So, and we used to gather, and every day, like there was border studies every Friday, and people would be gas-axed and thrown out and marched off the course, or to happen due to safety during the week. And we were all aware of the gravity. I think they're a little smarter, slant kinder, slant wiser now, as I think they try and recycle people that I found not yet competent on the equivalent course now. But in 97, 98, 99, very few, if ever, passed their second course. You're given once, if you were marched off through safety or underperforming, you get one more chance at the next Rio course. Wow. A year later or 6 months later, and statistically speaking or historically speaking, very few passed that second one. So when you saw people marched off that course, it was like watching a funeral. So career-wise.
Yeah, right.
So, in other words, in my mind, I had no doubt I had one crack at it, not two.
Yeah, absolutely. And so you finished selection, mate, and you presented your Sandy Beret, a proud moment for you. And what squadron did you go into when you passed Rio and were presented your beret?
Yeah, I went to 3 squadrons, so I troop water operator. So I did one of my other insertion skills, my specialty insertion skill was water operating, or water. Mm-hmm. So I went to I Troop 3 Squadron.
Yeah, right. And because that's a big 18 months of your... And as you said, 97, you made the decision to go for selection. 18 months later, you pass, and Matt passes as well, which is that you're really close, mate. And we'll get to for people who don't know, we'll get to that a little bit later and what happened to Matt. For you, would have been a proud moment, I reckon. But both you guys starting this journey together and completing it together, and both being beret qualified.
I think it was. I remember when we finished selection, and there was 27 of us that finished. They gave us a period of time. I think it was overnight before they told us whether or not we'd been selected, and that was balanced. Of course, I was euphoric to pass, but it was balanced with the fact that there was a particularly good soldier who became a RSM in the infantry corps that was on my course doing his 2nd or 3rd selection, and he was binned again. So apparently he passed 2 or 3, finished 2 or 3 and not been selected. This was his last crack at it. It was from memory, and he was told he was not suitable and wasn't required for the regiment. So it was balanced with that, thinking this guy is a very good soldier, and I feel that he may have got the short end of the straw here. Keep in mind that as a fellow student, I don't see everything, and you really don't see everything. But he was a top soldier, and he was not found suitable. So it was balanced with a little bit of surprise, remorse for someone else, but the euphoric feeling, to be honest, is so great. Unfortunately, you're more concerned that you've passed, but absolutely euphoric also that Matt had passed, and Nick. So 3 out of 3. Well, the 3 of us went on, and we all passed. So we were very happy. We went back. The CO at the time made a big deal of us. He was very congratulatory and very positive and warm and optimistic, whereas a lot of COs aren't necessarily, because you're just leaving their battalion. They've got no time for you professionally then, as was the case in the 90s. Yeah, so it was a very pleasant experience. We had to go back to the battalion, do another 4 weeks, march out procedures, and then I drove across the Nullarbor and started work that early 98.
So 98, you get to the regiment, mate, and the next year, 1999, mate, Inifet rolls on. And what was your role over there and how long were you deployed for on Inifet? Yeah,
we went into staging at Tyndall around middle to late August, I think. I'd just come off my water operators course. So we went from middle to late August staging in Tyndall through to my element of 3 Squadron. It was a trickle recall from Timor, very, very late December, something like the 20th of December, just prior to Christmas. I was home for Christmas, so, 3 or 4 months. It was initially going to be a 6-month deployment, but we were pulled back early. I believe one squadron ripped us out or conducted a relief in place with us, or started to, in a trickle fashion, simply because it was our first war operation certainly in anything troop or squadron strength, probably since South Vietnam. So they were pretty anxious to try and blood or facilitate as many personnel as possible getting that experience. And it was a multifaceted mission for me at the time. We got to do the strategic reconnaissance, so long-range patrols dropped right near the border of East Timor border, close to Indonesia. So we're talking the west border of East Timor. Right there, I did close protection for Xanana Guzmao when he made his return in October. Finally relieved after a month by Brazilian MPs, and they were different cats for sure. I did kind of something like special warfare operations with the Falantil and their containment areas in east of East Timor, and OP patrols, SR patrols. So pretty much the full spectrum of SF sort of operations over there.
So rewarding, and not your first deployment, like you had the few other deployments. So you come back from that deployment, and then 2001, you rolled into TAG, and so Tactical Assault Group West, and you just mentioned that the ACQB, is that right? The close quarter combat course was stressful.
Yep.
Moving on to team, most veterans I've spoken to have said it is the next level, and so what was that like for you coming on to team?
Yeah, again, you are 100% scrutinised and under the pump performance-wise. You are, it seemed to me anyway, constantly asked to perform at a level that is at the extremity of what you can achieve. Or so I felt so for me. The tempo is dynamic, relentless, and whilst you have a fair few weekends off here and there over like the 18-month, 2 years that I was on TAG, which was the TAG, the only tactical assault group at the time, I also remember having an acute sense of my own mortality. People were getting injured, and I had heard of people getting injured. It was, I think Nick actually said to you that apart from actual warfighting operations, it's the closest you can get tempo-wise and, I guess, getting pushed to your limits. And I remember being very aware of the fact that I could have a roping accident, an accident with explosives, with fast driving, with the absolute limits we were approaching and performing at with close quarter battle, live fires. So I remember just feeling very aware that I had to be 100% switched on all the time. So if you can imagine a job where from Monday to Friday, or if you're lucky Monday to Friday, if not, 14 days straight on a CT exercise or similar, you can't switch off. You are constantly under pressure to perform, both to do your role, but also because you're being scrutinised, constantly evaluated for performance.
And that in itself is a pressure cooker. Like that, as you're saying, it's a high stress environment. Accidents can happen, and as you know, because you've been in the regiment, in '96 there was the Black Hawk incident that you'd lost guys out of the regiment, and as you said earlier on the podcast, that you had become accustomed to that deaths can happen and injuries can happen because that tempo is so high, but it has to be that high for a reason, because on TAG, as Nick and many others have told me, you are the last resort. There is no fallback option apart from you guys.
100%. And whilst not, an example might be, whilst it's not the same, but a different context and similar-ish operations, if you look at the Lint Cafe, there's nothing after that. It's resolve it, or so it either can go well, indifferent, or pear-shaped. There's nothing after that. That CSOPs.
Absolutely.
Targets down, patch out, unload, bloody trying to get on the cans if you're lucky. So, 100%. It's unrelenting, and you just have to be the very best version of yourself that you can be.
And I want to roll forward into a day that changed the world and changed your career going forward, and many other careers and for anyone who joined the military. September 11, 2001. Everyone remembers where they were. Where were you on that day, and what do you remember unfolding?
Yeah, I was at home in a suburb called Atterdale. I had a house in South Perth, south of the river there. Something around, let's say, somewhere between 2100 or 9 p.m. to around 10:30, something like that in Perth time. And I've spoken about this before, and I think it was you said in one of your podcasts too, Adam, that I was switching channels back free-to-air TV. I mean, I'd seen bloody Euro Sky when I was in West Sahara 93, but they still hadn't in Australia, I don't believe. So you had 4 free channels. One of them didn't count. That was ABC at the time, or SBS, one you could never get. So cycling through the channels, and I saw it the first time, and I thought, that's a movie. And it's not even really held my interest. I thought it was, that the tech isn't bad, or the how they filmed that I'm unsure, but that must be a movie. It hasn't even clicked that it may have been real. So I cycled through the channels. I may have gone through it, come back to it once or twice again without it clicking. Eventually, though, I cycled back to that channel, whatever it was. I think it was Sandra Sully. It might have been Channel 10, reporting on it. And that's an interesting Sandra Sully story, isn't it, for her career? But the second airframe hit the Twin Towers, and then something has made me realise this is real, hey? So, yeah, as shocked as anyone else. Disbelief, processing this, thinking, well, the world's changed now forever. Because the United States, they're not going to let this go, nor should they. The world's changed. In the short to middle term, the world's going to radically change now.
Did you think at that point, being that you're privy to other information and secretive information, being in the regiment, did you foresee, well, I don't think anyone would have, but did you foresee that it would be the catalyst for us being involved in our longest ever war, and looking back then?
I didn't, and perhaps because I wasn't as an avid student of history that I should have been. My assumption, certainly unconscious, I'd say it was probably an unconscious assumption, was that the United States would swiftly deal with this in a dynamic, violent and fast action. Strategic action, composed of numerous strategic or operational actions. I didn't see the political machinations that would elongate it for so long. So no, the answer is no.
And because you getting back to the regiment, was there talk of, did the guys think, this is it, we're going to go, like, we're going to war now, like we'll be going with America, and this is where I always want to, and you may or may not be, it wasn't long after that the SAS did go in 01, didn't they? 01, 02, they did go in. So
very early, yep.
Were you earmarked to go on that trip?
I was, and through a number of circumstances, I'd already set in train motions to become an air marshal with Australian Federal Police. I'd already decided that my marriage at the time was suffering terribly by my service, and I'd made the decision and started down a path or course of action that before 9/11 had occurred, and I decided to stick with that decision. And I've spoken about this to people since then, and people say, well, gee, was that a difficult decision? It was, but hindsight is wonderful. People thought things were occurring. People thought a lot of things were occurring that did or didn't occur. So nothing was set in stone, and the air marshal capability was vibrant, it was dynamic, it was new, it was unknown, it was a niche, brand new capability. There were talks that it could be executed on an international stage with foreign forces, doing any number of things. So it wasn't the perceived dead end or ulterior or lesser choice necessarily that people think it was at the time. So I was definitely earmarked. I had no C ring me up and say, look, you're an experienced sniper. We really need your skills and your abilities and knowledge on this. Can you come and bolster and, at least from a technical sense, lead our sniper capability? And I said, look, I can't. I've made a decision to go this way. So I'm closing the door on it. I've come to a Y junction. I'm making a hard left instead of a right here.
So before you go to the AFP, you deploy to the Solomon Islands. And did that come up before September 11? Was that after, before you pivoted into...
No, that would have been before. No, that was before.
Yeah, right.
September 11, well before, yes. Well, not well before, but before.
So what was your role over there? Was there unrest in the Solomons at that point?
Yeah, it had turned into ostensibly the Wild West. The military had gone rogue, and from memory now, you're testing it. Good.
Sorry.
No, not at all. I believe that essentially the police, all law and order had been lost. So all forms of government control in a practical sense, so police and military, had disbanded, and not just disbanded, they were the perpetrators of horrendous crimes. So we're talking multiple murders, violent murders, killings, rapes, all manner and nature of horrendous crimes had been committed against their own people.
Mm-hmm.
There was a power vacuum, and I believe, someone else can probably give the political question, but the operational question for us was, or scenario was, there were a number in that power vacuum. There were a number of different forces we could back, or personalities we could support, in order for them to come to power and bring some law and order, some clarity, restore some order to the nation. So we were there to ensure that the appropriate peace talks and liaisons occurred between the right people, occurred in a peaceful fashion to enable someone to pick up the pieces, and Indigenous people, that is, as in Solomon Island citizens, to pick up the pieces and move forward in some kind of democratic fashion that we could tolerate.
And unfortunately, mate, it wouldn't be the last time that you would see the Solomon Islands.
Sick of the joint, mate. Yes.
You would go there as an AFP officer as well, and unfortunately, as you say, the unrest, it was in 2001, but then you were there again in 06, 07, and riots happening again. And and a previous guest on the podcast, Cam Hardiman, was deployed there in 2006 as well, and where one of the cars was absolutely destroyed. And so, it's been unstable in that region for a long, long time. So we'll get to that a little bit later. But I want to touch on that, mate, because you're taking a hard left, and you've reached the pinnacle. And I have to say, mate, and this is a credit to you, is it's a very unselfish decision that you made. You could have easily continued on and kept going in the warfighter role, and you would have had some, you would have gone on and had some great experiences. You could have deployed to Iraq and done some other amazing things, but you made an unselfish decision, which eventually you would end up getting to Afghanistan. But I want to highlight that for you, mate, that that would have been a very, very hard decision at the time. You're about to, you're training to play in a grand final. Afghanistan was the grand final, and you've decided to take a bit of a left turn, which I commend you for that, mate. So well done.
Yeah, thanks.
It's one of those things that I really wanted to highlight, because that is a tough decision to make.
It was tough. It was extremely tough. But I think one needs to remember, again, we're looking at it with hindsight, and look, everyone have their own opinion and perspective, but life's about sliding doors and going 2 juncture points, 3 juncture points, quad juncture points, and people make decisions. And there are people that stayed there at that time, that did one rotation of Afghanistan, then discharged, went into a life of a relative anonymous state, as in they never deployed again from 2005 onwards. They've disappeared into relative professional soldiering oblivion. Mm-hmm. Some have stayed on for 25, 30 years, done 10 tours. Life's all about perspective, and nothing's ever a zero-sum game, and I use that term a lot in my life now. It's not as black as white as it appears when someone looks back down the pipe 25 years ago and looks at it as a black and white decision. It's never that simple. Absolutely. And it wasn't that simple. My life went a lot of different directions that it wouldn't have gone, positive directions that it wouldn't have gone if I had stayed in the Special Air Service at that point as well. And really? I'm lucky that life and circumstance allowed me to come back and do that professional role later on. Of course.
Yeah, and that's a very, very good point to touch on, exactly, mate. And so talk me through the process of, because you're fit, you're physically fit, you're at the pinnacle of your fitness, everything's going good. What was the process of joining the AFP back then in 2001?
It was a farce, and I'll tell you why. Due to the political sensibilities surrounding this program in an Australian context, I believe Special Air Service were offered it, touching on the last point. They refused it at some level, so I was told secondhand. AFP were initially offered it. They refused it, so it grew like a satanic birth out of the Attorney General's Department. The AGs in Australia were the only ones that would tolerate it. And at that point, there was something called the Australian Protective Service, APS, which later morphed into the AFP and became the Australian Federal Police Protective Service, as you would have seen around. But at the time, they were the APS, Australian Protective Service, under the AG's department. So we went under that banner of the Attorney General, and at the time, their selection process was the same as the public service. So I literally wrote a 2-page EOI and went for a board interview, and that was it. Bob's your uncle. There was no fitness test that I remember. And I remember, again, not trying to labour on the point in my resume, I said something about SAS down the bottom of my resume, or I may have briefly said it at the start of the interview. And I went and and I remember having an hour selection panel with something like 4 or 5 people, and as those selection panels want to do at the end, they go, okay, well, now that we've finished and we've wrapped up our part, you've got 5 minutes to say anything you want to say. Except before you do that, I just want to ask, do you feel that there's anything about the SES that made you want to do this role? After 55 minutes, I realised I'd blown the whole thing out of I thought that I could just leverage my Special Forces experience, and without stating it, they would just know that I'm tactically good for this role. And then I've realised and had to tap dance in the last 5 minutes that nothing against SES, but they certainly don't have any counter-terrorism skills that I'm aware of, and their role is something else. So I realised I had to tap dance very fast and illustrate to these public servants who had no experience or knowledge of what it actually required of being an air marshal, because no one did in Australia, but they, at that time, and had no knowledge of war fighting, of counter-terrorism ops anyway. So it's like trying to, explain to someone who's blind in a dark room at midnight how to walk to the door and they've never done it before, or something ridiculous. So some other silly metaphor that very, very difficult. And somehow out of that strange, non-fit-for-purpose process, I was selected through that and become an air marshal. And because of that strange selection or recruitment epoch that they were running through early doors in the air marshal program, they got some very not fit-for-purpose personnel in that role as well, which later, when I became part of the instructional staff and so on, and gained a senior role, it was then up to me to either improve those persons professionally and tactically, or performance management, however that looked.
Yeah, right. So really interesting start to your AFP career, and you do an exchange over in Germany. And what was that like? Because that was, as you say, the Air Marshal program was very new. Had they had a Air Marshal program for a long time, or were they pretty new in their existence as well over in Germany?
They'd had it for a fair while. Of course, it expanded and became fortified more after 9/11, but the European Air Marshal operational theatre was there, as in they were there, because you may remember, and I won't try to pluck any off the top of my head, but there have been a number of terrorist hijacking instances from probably the late 60s, if not earlier. And we had the Beta Mine Hamp group or something like that, a lot of homegrown European and German terrorists through Europe since World War II, if not before. So they had a capability already, a very odd capability by Australian standards. And why I say odd is, for instance, if they flew intra-Europe, they weren't allowed to carry firearms. And I swear this is the truth. They used to carry rocks in socks when they flew intra-Europe. So if they flew from Berlin to Paris, they couldn't carry firearms. So they used to carry batons and rocks, like small boulders the size of cricket balls, put them in socks and swing them if needed as some kind of soft cudgel or bloody blunt force trauma device on the aircraft. So that's where we were that's where they were. Of course, if they flew outside of Europe, they were then legislatively allowed to carry firearms. So
that's amazing. Far out.
The cultural oddities, and I say oddities, I mean, I found the Germans in general to be great people, very professional in what they do. I saw some of the GSG9 or GSG9 people training and got to mix with them there, and very, very professional. They did have some oddities by Australian standards, and no doubt we did some things in an odd fashion from their perspective as well.
Yeah, right. And that blows me away. That rocks and like, because we've all seen the movies where the air marshal has the firearm on board, and in all the Hollywood movies that they come in and so essentially they have the power it's to stop hijackings, it's to arrest, and then they hand over to the authorities on the ground once you land. Is that how it works?
Correct. And the same, we adopted the same profile. The primary mission is to prevent entry to the cockpit, full stop, to avoid, to ensure that aircraft doesn't become a flying missile. So prevent hijacking the aircraft is primary role. Mm-hmm. Second role is prevent illegal entry to the cockpit, which is obvious bloody precursor to the first primary role. And then get it to ground under control with that cockpit intact, i.e. our pilots or the pilots still controlling the aircraft. What happens to the rest of the aircraft is essentially irrelevant. We don't want that aircraft going into an Australian Twin Towers equivalent. That was the role. Same with the Germans. So, as you say, as we're talking about, I suppose, the oddities I found with the Germans is that they had incredibly strict use of force, but you could club someone with a rock and a sock. So I remember thinking, what is going on with it?
What?
They, unlike Australian law enforcement, because I participated in I went as a foreign exchange instructor, but for pure experience, I did all their testing and training. Mm-hmm. I dropped in and out of training because it was a brilliant professional learning curve. So I wanted to just assimilate everything I could from the experience. So I'd do all the shooting drills and lessons, and I'd run some of the lessons, and I'd certainly shoot them all. And they are taught to shoot to the body. So there were serials where you would shoot to the arm or leg, as silly as it sounds, instead of the centre of the scene mass like Australian law enforcement are taught. So, we can't dare shoot someone in the head as first point of call. We can shoot them in the leg, but we can club them in the head several times with a rock and cave their brains out. So I find that very odd at the time.
Well, it's interesting because every law enforcement person I've spoken to says you always shoot for the centre body of mass, because if you're aiming for an arm or a leg, you've got a higher chance of missing. Like if you're aiming for your centre mass, you've got a better chance of actually hitting the person. So that's interesting that they don't go for the centre body of mass. They and yourself, being that you are a sniper, you're trained at a better to aim and go. And if they're on the move, very hard to hit an arm or a leg. Very, very. That's just wow. That just blows me away.
Certainly, Adam, and we're not even addressing the byproducts of what about an increased chance of over-penetration in a civilian environment with his targets behind. Mm-hmm. What if that smaller target now miss and hit a child, an innocent person behind them in the aircraft?
The depressuring, if they hit the wrong thing, and you can get pressure and lose your pressure. And wow, okay. But you can, as you say, you can club... You can club with a rock.
You can dash someone's brains out with a rock that you picked up on the side of the airport before you got on.
Wow.
And it was sanctioned. We used to run training scenarios where they bring their rock on in like a footy sock. And I'd be going, are you people serious? But I've got to say this, Adam, they were exceptional professionals.
Of course.
Outside of the oddities, and I'm sure we did many odd things from their perspective, but the level of training and attention to detail that only the Germans could do was outstanding. All students were issued heart rate monitor. This is 2003, and their physiological reactions or their stress levels, physiological stress reactions were monitored and graphed over the 4-week course or 6-week course.
Oh wow!
So, and people were binned. Because if they went, we talk about stress reactions and so on, adrenaline stress effects, and if they went into what we might call the black, where they lose fine motor skill over 140, certainly 150, 160, students were removed from the course because they went too fast into the black, so to speak.
Yeah,
so the heart rate spiked 150 plus too fast. So they're getting binned for their own involuntary adrenaline stress reactions.
Yeah, wow.
as part of their, evaluations, I suppose. And these things were graphed, and it was hard metrics that were displayed to them on their weekly. That is light years of anything we had at the time, which was all subjective evaluation and observations. And I guess the only ways, unless it was a shooting, where you can mark shooting, taking away the old 7.62mm pencil that we put in the target that old engineers will remember. Apart from shooting, where you could pretty much objectively score something, the only objectivity we had a lot of the time was multiple instructors, I guess, coalescing and agreeing that a certain standard was whatever it was.
Yeah, right.
So they were very, very scientific and clinical in how they objectively assess students. Every air marshal had to be fluent in both English and German for their intra-Europe flights. When they did their scenarios, when they took control of the aircraft, they'd repeat everything twice. Once in German, once in English. And you could see them under stress, like German speakers having to go into English, and they would start getting words back to front and so on. And I'm thinking, well, I only speak English here, so that's all I've got to bring to the party. I think I learnt, half a dozen German words like
yeah,
stop, yeah, yes, no, stop, put your hands up or I'll shoot, sort of thing. If that.
Yeah, wow.
So they were incredibly advanced personnel in a lot of ways too.
Absolutely. Mate, we're just going to have a quick break, and we'll just have a quick toilet break, and we'll come back. Welcome back after that little short break. So, Doug, you finish your time as an air marshal in 2003, and you go over to Germany and do that, and then, mate, in 2005, you transition into the tactical sniper in the AFP. Talk me through this role, mate.
Yeah, that was interesting, Adam. I guess the genesis of that, as we spoke, is that I found that the air marshal program had become a little pedestrian for me operationally, and I knew there were danger signs when I started to actively hope that a terrorist incident would occur on the aircraft while I was working, and that's not a healthy attitude, I don't think, in any sort of job. Some would argue different, but part of that transition was the AFP were, for a number of internal political reasons, were looking to, rather than grow their own tactical operators, which they had a shortage of, as they needed to expand their capability, they put out a national advertisement where they would take old, what used to be SATPAV, but now I think it's still NCTC, now National Counter-Terrorism Committee, counter-terrorism tactical operators. So guys are already qualified in police organisations statewide, police forces, or TAG East or West, so military personnel. The police personnel would go through a truncated program and transfer across into the AFP quickly. Those who are military would have to go through the full AFP academy, or college as they called it, then do 1 year probation. In my case, it was on the road, that is literally in uniform, doing police general duties. That was the pathway. So it was quite a large transition to make psychologically, knowing that I was stepping out of, some would argue, well, not argue, it is a counter-terrorism role, the air marshal program, 18 months into relative oblivion or purgatory, counter-terrorism purgatory, before stepping back into a counter-terrorism role with the Australian Federal Police. So the college itself was different, life's an experience, and I met some good people there. I don't regret that at all. It gave me a different view, perspective on life and people, and a lot of it positive. What I found interesting about general duties is that it apart from the paperwork, the dreaded paperwork, it gripped me and it entertained me. When I say entertained me, it kept me involved far more than I thought it would. And here I'd like to talk about judgment, because across the whole spectrum of law enforcement or policing or armed forces roles, or military or paramilitary, I find it's all about judgment. And I find sometimes people view, when they come up against offenders, bad guys, the enemy, whatever term you wish to give those personnel, it's quite often written and spoken about as a zero-sum game scenario, or black and white. That is, it's viewed as my life or theirs, or If they have a a knife, I must use a gun or something similar. But and then they talk about things like parity, disparity, or parity. So roles like that carry far more gravity than society gives the role credit for. And quite often you need to use the biblical wisdom of Job or the judgment of Solomon even. And I'll give you a sort of example of that is I don't believe, or one step back, I don't believe our law enforcement personnel are trained well enough. And that's obviously a resources issue. It's no personnel or human resource are necessarily to blame for that. It's simply, I guess, a financial resources issue. But the best way to talk about that is, I guess, examples. And when I was in uniform, we used to find, or even in the military, in any level, when I was in infantry or Special Air Service or Special Operations or tactical police or on the road in uniform, is that it's all about mental approach. And we talk about that in high performance sports, don't we? Talk about visualization or mental rehearsal, preparation. So you don't suddenly arrive at the coalface or the nexus point or the initiation of something with no prior consideration of what you're doing, or you shouldn't. You should mentally prepare as much as possible. And I used to do that, quite often, even in uniform. And this is where I found some scenarios very challenging, and I think it's worth pointing out because I think general duties police don't get enough credit for this. And it's not spoken about enough. Why that is, I'm unsure. But I mean, there's plenty of so-called high level or sexy talk about, the different levels of policing that more high profile, like tactical policing, dog work, EOD, or water police, diving, whatever. But I remember getting us, and again, this comes back to the zero sum game decision or black and white scenarios. In the police, you talk about, you taught things like the use of force continuum. That is, there's a number of things you can use, starting from, I guess, open hand techniques, that is your fists, or unarmed combat, self-defense, whatever you want to call it, through to, so-called escalation of force, that is potentially your baton, what they call other weapons, that is, for instance, a chair that might be at hand quickly when you're caught unawares or unprepared and you don't have time to use anything else. So they call it other weapons. Things like tasers, OC spray or capsicum spray, of course, building up to different types of completely lethal use of force, like your firearm, I guess. And you taught to use your judgment around that, and also taught that it's not necessarily an escalation, like you don't step through gateways, it's a continuum, like a circle, and you go from nothing to straight to the top of the continuum, i.e. firearm, or somewhere in between or not at all. And that's probably a layman's way of explaining it. Now, there was one scenario I had, harking back to this, not viewing these roles as a zero-sum game, because I think you're doing yourself a disservice as an operator if you do that. Getting a job where on a Sunday afternoon, I still remember it quite vividly, and police communications were coming through and trying to give us as much background on the scenario as possible. And it was something like the offender was on a property and the whole family, his whole family had fled the scene, had fled the house, the family house. The person traditionally had been known to police to be an ice addict and was quite late 20s, quite fit, very, very aggressive, had incidences beforehand where he had presented with mental health issues. What piqued my interest is that he was a clearance diver, so an ex-clearance diver in the Navy, and he got out medically discharged through perhaps mental health issues or something else. But so talking about this mental preparation coming into this, I thought to myself, and again, it's probably my not even my apprehended bias, it's my actual bias. I thought, this guy's a clearance diver, I don't want to hurt this guy. If there's anything I can do to not hurt this person, I'm going to neutralise them. That is, when I say neutralise, make them ineffective so they don't hurt anyone else. No doubt I'm going to have to detain them or arrest them, or at least, take them off the scene until they can, so they no longer present a threat to anyone else for the time being. So we got to the scene. What I used to do is regularly just park off the scene, not like movies or like a lot of people do, come screaming in the front driveway, lights and sirens. Then you place yourself at a disadvantage. I normally park out of visual and around the corner, and quite often with no noise whatsoever. So coming into this property, you could hear this young fella, I was probably 35 at the time when he was late 20s, absolutely going berserk. You could hear screams, you could hear furniture, and what he'd been doing is, because of the drug effect that was occurring with him, almost crazy drug strength. He was picking up solid wooden garden furniture, tables, single-handedly picking them up and launching them. He completely destroyed the house. And as we came up, I was with the guy I was working with. We came down the side of the house, and again, I'd made my decision. I'm not going to, if there's any way, shape or form, I don't injure this person, I won't do so. And again, that's a judgment call. So I've come around the corner and I've decided to pull my OC spray, and he's come around the corner with an iron bar, literally one of those adaptable sort of dumbbells you can use where you can slide the weights on and off the ends, and they're made out of hardened bloody stainless steel, or somewhere in the order of bloody 20 centimeters long or 25 centimeters long. Gave me an absolute look of death. This gave me a battle cry and started to launch at me. And the only thing that was between me was quite a loose fence, but he was probably about 4 meters away from me. And all I've done is sprayed him. And we know that there's an old saying that OC spray works on 80% of the people, 80% of the time. And if you want to start playing with those 20%, it's probably someone that's affected heavily by ice. So it was never going to be a scenario where the odds were necessarily stacked in my favour, that he wasn't going to sort of come upon me with that iron bar. But I guess this is what I'm talking about before. It's not a zero-sum game. I think if when you choose to serve, it's not about, if they pull a knife and my life is threatened, I'm going to shoot them with a gun, or I'm going to discharge my firearm and put them down, and I'm going to keep shooting at the centre of the scene mass until they go down. Sometimes I think when it comes to service like that, should be at least an unspoken acknowledgement that at times you're going to allow yourself to be disadvantaged, or you're going to allow yourself to be in a disadvantageous tactical scenario, because your job is not there to just to win every gunfight or win every punch up in a pub necessarily. It's about serving. And sometimes serving is about allowing yourself to be exposed to danger against your better judgment, so you don't harm a member of the public, or an innocent, in a military context, dare I say, someone overseas, an innocent bystander, or someone that there's not necessarily the most evil person that's walked the planet. And I think that's what makes maybe not an effective police officer, but a law enforcement person with, dare I say, a good attitude, or a military person with a correct attitude. Now, don't misunderstand me with someone like fighting, international terrorists overseas. When you're an SF operator or an infantry soldier, that's not the same thing. What I'm talking about is that assumed risk you must take on yourself, I believe, if you can wake up in the morning and look yourself in the mirror and say, I executed the job to the best of my ability today. It wasn't an ego. It wasn't a game of egos on my behalf. And to give you, I guess, the juxtaposition or the opposite to that is, I've also seen people where violent offenders have been armed with a knife, and they are certainly out to hurt someone. They're out to kill someone, 100%. And I've seen police officers not doing things except jump on their back, like run in and just jump on their back. And I'd argue that's probably the other side of what I'm talking about. Sometimes lethal force or certainly extreme measures are needed. So it's all about judgment, I guess, and that is what I believe is where the real training lies, and probably there's a training deficit there in a lot of law enforcement agencies, and probably in the military nowadays. And the opposite to that is East Timor 99. There were inexperienced young soldiers who were whilst having unlawful discharges accidentally, they were then failing to pull the trigger when they should have because they felt disempowered, or they were literally too intimidated or scared of the consequences from hierarchy if they pulled the trigger, and they may have been wrong, but they clearly weren't wrong. So it's all about judgment, and I think that's where the secret to a lot of training lies, where more time should be spent on is the actual training around judgment and around, I guess, scenario-based training.
And you serve, well, in your general duties, correct me if I'm wrong, Doug, but you served with a former guest of the podcast, Cam Hardiman. And what was that like serving with Cam?
I found Cam, it was very good working with Cam. From a general policing perspective, he was a very experienced police officer prior to me meeting him. So what I found with Cam is that he was very relaxed and didn't get overly excited about, I guess, normal policing matters, or even policing matters that less experienced police officers might get their heart rates going concerning what was occurring, or they might get a little bit excited or a little bit stressed or might overreact. Cam was very relaxed due to his experience and possibly due to just Cam being Cam.
He's one of those guys, isn't he?
He's almost laconic, mate, is a term that's not used nowadays too much. He's relaxed, he's laconic, he's fairly, doesn't get too excited about things. So, yeah, and I guess, and then going back to that judgment thing, and we're talking about Cam and how he's relaxed, I mean, we talk about parity, a parity approach to things, that is an equal approach to things, and police they like to say regularly that you must apply parity, that is not overreact physically or what you do, but nor underreact. And I guess what I'm talking about is potentially at times underreacting, if need be, to again, I guess, serve and not harm a member of the public, I suppose. And we look at, and again, very, very controversial subject, but what I would talk about is, I think it's a New South Wales police officer, was it, that I think he's not even under investigation anymore. I think they've passed sentence, haven't they, on the police officer that unfortunately tasered the elderly woman at that aged care facility.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, he was found guilty. Yep.
Yeah, I think, and look, no one loves a Monday morning quarterback, and everything seems perfect with hindsight. But I guess what I'm saying is an approach, and I'm not suggesting this is the perfect solution, but an approach would be something like that, would be to say, look, I'd far risk being stabbed in the heart by an elderly woman before I taser an elderly woman. That would be one approach. I'm not suggesting that's the best approach. I'm not criticising that officer. I don't need to, nor should I. The justice system has made their judgment on that. I guess it comes down to judgment, doesn't it? And again, that point, I'll draw a line under it again. As a police officer or someone that serves your country, there must be, it's not about win or lose here. There's got to be an assumed, in my mind anyway, an assumed risk you voluntarily and willingly take on, that I'm not always going to just do what suits me, what keeps me 100% safe. I'm going to allow the other person a slight advantage here if needed to ensure I don't hurt them, kill them, or hurt them any more than I have to.
It's interesting that you say that, Doug, because what people have got to realise too is you as police officers, sometimes you have 20 or 30 seconds to make a decision. Like there's a lot to process in 20 to 30 seconds, whether you, as you mentioned with that guy on the property where he's high as a kite and, he could have bashed you with that iron bar. You've got 30 seconds to make a judgment call. Do I grab my OC spray? Do I grab my firearm? So that's the thing that, like, it's a very high intense, high pressure job that you, as you're saying, your judgment's under scrutiny all the time. And if you get it right, you've absolutely, you praise to, but if you get it wrong, you're criticised, and as you're saying with that poor old, the poor police officer that was found guilty. Yeah, unfortunately, the consequences of either action, right or wrong, you're going to be judged.
You are, and look, I could say more, but again, I'd be judging.
Of course.
Subjectively judging, but one would think that approaching an aged care facility, that you would think almost the last thing going through your head would be drawing a firearm. You would think.
Correct.
I wasn't born, and society have made their call on that through the criminal justice system. So I'll leave it there.
Absolutely. No, I think it's best to. And so you do your general duties, mate, and then you go into the sniper teams for the AFP. And did you, from your military background of doing your sniper course, and I remember you saying that the sniper course was one of the hardest courses that you'd done in the military. Did you find it as challenging when you transitioned over to the AFP side of things?
Skills-wise, no, because the skill level I had to exercise and display in the military was of a higher level than what I had to display in the police. The challenges that laid with policing when it came to being a police marksman, because there was much controversy around that term, particularly in the AFP. Are they a sniper? Are they called a marksman? Are they a police marksman? What are they? And I would argue that marksman clearly centres around your ability to accurately engage a target, whereas sniping is mostly about getting in and out, getting in on target and getting out off target alive. And incidentally, you happen to pull a trigger in the middle there somewhere or multiple times. So to me, the skill and ability around sniping is the field craft. It's the exercising of infiltration, exfiltration skill, and everything that lies around taking that shot itself and surviving for hours, days, weeks, potentially in hostile environments, as opposed to sort of checking in for an 8-hour shift, going somewhere, laying down behind a trigger. Something may occur, something may not occur, but then someone taps you on the shoulder. Unless you get overtime, someone taps you on the shoulder, relieves you, and you knock off for the afternoon and go home or something. So I found the man management probably the most challenging around. And as I think I may have said before, the differing cultures between military and policing was what I found most challenging.
And for you, did you eventually become a trainer and realise that the gap analysis between the military and the AFP, that you could value add and start to implement some of the training skills that you learnt from the military into the AFP?
Look, the appetite seemed to be there. So the obvious appetite seemed to be there to do both. I was willing to impart what level of training I could around what we might call the war skills. Even though it's a policing environment, that is the ability to manually judge distance, the ability to, I guess, lie concealed or unobserved for long periods of time and observe targets and perceive patterns by observing targets, to then report back to give intelligence to higher command, but also to give you information around providing a better shot later, rifle shot if you needed to deliver that. The skills around navigation and things like that, skills around mission planning, getting in and out without being observed, remaining covert or at least discreet at times. There was an appetite for that, so it appeared at the onset. But I think egos played a bit to do with this, like it does in most things. And when the rubber hit the road with this, and I think certain persons in the police started to grasp the incredible training liability this involved, because there's not something you can just pick up, grasp in a couple of hours, get a course report, put it down, and you're an expert. These are things that take hours, days, weeks, months, and they need to be regularly revisited over and over many different areas or skill levels. So once that was impressed upon people, or they became to realise that, the appetite quickly ceased.
And After you get in, mate, you have a couple of rapid deployments, and I'm just going through your bio, and you deploy to Tonga, you deploy to the Solomon Islands, and then you go back to Timor again as well, mate. And what was that like? Because you were there in '99, and then you're back there in 2006.
Yeah, it was even a bit long. Yeah, you're dead right. It was something like 2007, 2008. Whenever it coincided when obviously Renato made his attempted assassination attempt on Jose Ramos Hoyta and Junana Guzmao. So whenever that was, I'm thinking somewhere circa 2008 or
Oh six, oh seven, I think it was from some of the guys I've had on.
yeah, dead right, mate. Bloody early onset Alzheimer's kicking in, mate. I'm losing days. Mate, it was interesting insofar as how much little had changed, or how little things had changed. The only thing that was missing was the pro and anti-Australian graffiti on the walls, but the infrastructure was about as deconstructed, or a lot of the buildings were still in ruins. The infrastructure hadn't been rebuilt, so not a lot had changed visually, believe it or not, which was disappointing to see. The infrastructure hadn't been built up, and an interesting thing I remember out of that is I think I was only about 2 or 3 weeks into that deployment, and the AFP wanted to pull me out to attend a New Zealand Special Tactics Group sniper concentration in Auckland, which was a training exercise. So what I found incredible about that, and I actually voiced it quite sort of, I guess, robustly towards command, was, so this is the first time in my life I've been removed from operations to attend a training exercise, and not the other way around. So that was the nature of the AFP, I suppose, and where they wanted to position the AFP politically in their relationships with other international tactical groups, I guess.
And I want to touch on something here, mate. A day that was rocked for you is when you lost your good mate Matt Locke in 2007. He was killed in Afghanistan, and as you stated at the start of the podcast, you were in 5-7 together. You then went and did selection together, mate. Talk me through this day, because we've all lost great mates. How did this day affect you?
Yeah, look, it was probably the beginning of the end for me when it came to me experiencing an acute mental health crisis 5 years later. I suppose it was. I found it very traumatic, and I don't want to make this about me, because I'll make comments about how it affected me, sure, but Matthew Locke's death in Afghanistan has affected so many people to a large depth, but also across a great spectrum. I guess, like I said before, I've never seen such an outpouring of grief from hard people. And when I say hard, I mean strong, resilient people. And I say people because I'm talking soldiers and their wives. In some cases, soldiers and their husbands, female operators or female support staff in the regiment. When I attended his funeral in Karrakatta, 2007, the absolute restrained grief and the intensity of that grief was heavy, and it was thick. It was one of the hardest things I've ever had to do, and I imagine one of the hardest things for a lot of people that attended that day. Dare I say, Matt's immediate family, God bless them. So I'd already been looking back on things, and again, Monday morning quarterbacks, or Monday morning cricket selectors or commentators. There's nothing worse. 2020 hindsight makes everything seem very simple, but looking back over time, there are probably a number of events, like a lot of people in this world, a lot of events that added to my mental health crises around 2012. And I think, if I can just take a segue left for a moment,
Of course.
I think mental health is not all about. There's a large scale of mental health, as we know. So I think anyone that's lived has gone through a life well lived, or experienced a life well lived. If they didn't have mental health ups and downs along the way, I think they're probably not being honest with themselves, or they're just flat out lying to others. I think that's a natural part of your mind is like your body. If you're a professional athlete sooner or later you're going to have niggles, you're going to have injuries. Same with your mental and psychological wherewithal. If you have a life well lived and you go through all traumatic events, you can have your bumps, grazes, your injuries, minor, intermediate, and serious along the way. And I had many of those experiences leading up to Matt's killed in action moment in Afghanistan. But that was, without being dramatic, the start of my descent into the mental health sort of incident I had in 2012. So to answer your question, to sum it up, it affected me greatly, but who am I? There were so many more people that were close, that were, like Matt's family, for instance, that it would have profoundly affected their life and what occurred after that. Yet alone, the most obvious people, Lee Locke and Keegan Locke at the time. And I think I mentioned to you, Adam, off air, I attended the regiment's 60th anniversary last year in Perth. And for the first time, well, not the first time, I met Keegan when he was a young fella, on my knee in Wattle Grove, in Matt's Wattle Grove married quarter, circa 1997. Seeing him fully grown for the first time in the flesh and talking to me, it was quite chilling how much he reminded me of Matt. It was chilling and disconcerting. Matt would kill me if he's looking down from heaven. He'd kill me now to say that Keegan's a larger lad. He's larger in stature, so he's taller in frame, I believe. Still a fit guy, but the way he looked at me and the way his mannerisms, the way he spoke was quite chilling and disconcerting how much he is like his father. Mm. I mean, obviously the most positive sense.
Of course. And for you, mate, when you found out that, Matt had been killed, were you thinking to yourself, well, what am I doing here? Like, I need to get back and I need to be, I should be over in Afghanistan, like doing the job of what, as you were, in the regiment. And did you have that moment, or were you just sort of still focusing, you were like this path of the AFP?
Yeah. Prior to Matt's death, I felt for a while that I was doing an also-ran trade. And what I mean by that is I felt my life had led to serving overseas, doing what Matt and other mates of mine were doing, that is Special Air Service and Special Operation Task Group operations offshore in defence of Australia's national interests. But instead I was back doing policing, domestic and international, sure, but I felt like my skills were probably being underutilised and I wasn't doing what I should be doing. I felt like I was taking an easy road than I should have been taking. So when this incident happened with Matt in 2007 that we're talking about, I guess that brought it into the forefront of my mind. I couldn't ignore it anymore, that I should have been, and again, or not again, but probably incorrectly, I thought I should have been over there for the last 5, 6, 7 years with Matt. And, if I'd have been on the ground there, maybe things could have been different. You start questioning the 1%ers, even the half percenters. So what if I was an SAS? I was a water operator. What if I'd stayed there? As an extra warm body, maybe he didn't rotate. Maybe I would have rotated instead of him. Or maybe he would have gone left instead of right. And again, using that movie analogy of sliding doors, you start to question and think, I won't go so far as to say that I caused it, but through ripple effects and so on in time and space, could I have influenced events along the way to change what occurred to him? Or more importantly, why him, not me? And then you start to even question yourself as you start to berate yourself. And in my case, you start to think you've taken the easy life. So like I said before, policing can be very hard. Tactical policing can be very hard. But at the end of the day, there's only so much overtime that the police department or the Australian taxpayer is going to pay. And you know that. So someone's going to tap, someone's going to knock you off. I'm going to say knock you off, let you quit for the day, let you go home for the day, or they're going to tap, or your shift ends. You go home, hot shower, hot feed, warm bed, and then go again.
Mm.
You get a chop out, you get relief. Holistically, it is easier. Full stop. So I felt doing that, I'd taken the easy road, whereas people like Matt had gone the harder road, and they had.
And that's a hard thing to it's a hard thing to comprehend too, because you've got see for you you've got skin in both games. So you've been in the military, you're a police officer, you've been in both, so you've been in the regiment and now so that I understand, mate. It would be very hard, and so that happens, mate, and then you deploy again to the Solomon Islands in 2008, so just after Matt's passing, and then in 2009, mate, you deploy to Afghanistan, and this is where you're back. You're actually doing the job. And how did this happen? How did this deployment come up for you?
Rolling on from what you just said, I guess I'd already started gravitating consciously and subconsciously. I'd started to gravitate back towards the Special Air Service. I'd managed to, I'd been reinstated or re-enlisted or reposted, I should say, back to the reserve element of Special Air Service. I'd started farming myself out as under the guise of compatibility training with Army and interoperability training with Army. I was travelling across to Special Air Service in Perth and doing certain types of training. But I was also going to because I was based in Brisbane here with the AFP, I was making every excuse under the sun to somehow reach out to the local infantry units in Brisbane, being 6 and 8, 9, and offering myself up as a specialist trainer to upgrade them and give them the skills that they would need to survive or to increase their survivability when they were deploying to Afghanistan. I think that around that stage it had either transitioned to MTF from MRTF, or was had either transitioned or was going to, but I was also going in and delivering tactics, advanced driving training, close protection, low-level elements of close protection training, and certain specialist skills training to the guys and girls being deployed on the MTF contingents, but also those under the guys doing the guarding and sentinel operations in and around Kabul and greater Afghanistan as well. So I was going into regularly in I guess, police uniform. And that stage was multicam. In a strange twisted fate, Australian Federal Police were wearing NATO cryocam before Australian Army were, at least regular Army. And I was going in and training them. So I was already building that bridge or segue, practical segue across to Army, even then.
So you're doing this, and then you deploy on rotation 11, and you deploy to Afghanistan. And at this point, 2009-10, the war in Afghanistan is going crazy. And what was your role over there? And I'll get into a little bit down in a sec with the going outside the wire. But what role did you play over there when you deployed in 2009?
Mate, I initially deployed because a mate of mine rang me up, and it's amazing. I'm not sure how well it'll work nowadays, but it was still dare I say it, a case of old boys network operating, as it did with me helping out 6 and 8, 9 in Brisbane, because that came about because there were a couple of ex-Special Air Service troop commanders who were doing their sub-unit command posting back in infantry battalions. So they're back with 6 and 8, 9 going, hey, Shero, can you come in and help us out doing this type of training? It was easy for them because I'd come in under AFP dollar, so it wasn't costing Army any resources. The Army units themselves didn't have to indent for any extra resources or money to get me in, yet they could gain that I guess that training capability or skill. And my deployment in 2009-10 was literally about another mate of mine ringing me up and saying, look, Rex, who was, believe it or not, an ex-SASR patrol commander who I played cricket with in Perth, was now a major and was looking to bolster, I guess, his capability with SAS personnel, in particular snipers, for the rotation that he was going to command. So it was literally that. It was someone ringing me up, and I said, "Yeah, sure. Let Brett know I'm on board." And next minute, I've got movement class ringing me up saying, "Just be here. This is your equipment list. Have this ready. Be at the airport. This is your flight on these dates, and come down." And that's how it started. An elongated or a very short, compressed skills uptake or skills maintenance period or re-maintenance, I guess, upskilling again. And the mission focused training I needed to ensure that I was compatible with the rest of the group. That occurred over a compressed timeline, and then I deployed around 2009.
So with that, how was the AFP? Did you just say, "Hey, I'm going on this deployment," or were they supportive of it, or how did that happen?
They were a little nonplussed. There had been other elements, or certainly personnel from state police forces that had done it before through their reserve capacity as commandos, being full-time police and reserve commandos. But within the AFP Police Tactical Group, I think it was a relatively new concept, and I don't think many, if anyone, had done it to that point. So I think they were a little bit nonplussed. They were a little bit surprised, and I think they may have been a little bit too shocked to know what to do at that point. So it just I just applied for it, told them what I was doing, submitted my leave, and it seemed, from memory, it seemed to happen with fairly few obstructions the first time, until I tried to go again later, and that's when some obstacles presented themselves.
And we'll get into that a little bit later down the track. And so with that, you deployed in 2009. So you mentioned that it was your friend that was looking for that capability to have you over there. And are you attached to the regiment at this point, or are you working? Who were you working with when you were over there in 2009?
Yeah, mate, I was posted to the reserve component of Special Air Service Regiment at the time. From memory, I think that had occurred by then, but I was attached to one commando.
Yeah, right. Okay. Yep. So you're working with one commando, and mate, you get over there in 2009. What's it like being boots on the ground? Originally the regiment went back in 2001. You're over there in 2009. The war's heating up. And this is where I want to bring in the concept. We ask about contact. We ask, or I've asked a lot of veterans about, what was it like getting into a contact. For you, mate, the mindset of going outside the wire, this is where I really want to do a deep dive, because I've never asked this question of, like, stepping outside that wire. You are now, your life, you could give your life. Throughout that time that you were over there, there would have been times that you would have had that feeling of, if I make this decision or I go this way or that way, that could be it. Talk me through that.
Sure. Let me preface it by saying, Adam, by no way do I feel that I'm the most experienced nor the most exposed soldier to comment on this. I'm certainly an exposed soldier and someone who has experienced it, but there are probably, or not probably, there are many more personnel that you could interview that could give you a more exhaustive and perhaps a deeper account of this. So I just want to preface that.
Of course.
But having said that, I'm still one through experience that is qualified to make statements on it. So what I'd say is I certainly experiencing a number of near-death experiences there. What I would say is that initially it is potentially crippling, so psychologically crippling. And things like in 2009, 2010, we were still doing GAF operations, so ground assault force, that is vehicles. And the ID threat was extreme, or certainly very high. So high, in fact, that very shortly after that, Special Operations Task Group abandoned the majority of GAF operations in favour of HAF operations, that is, helo assault forces, or I guess jumping in a target or coming in on airframes. to minimise their exposure to literally rolling over an ID on the ground or having it detonated or functioning in whatever means as they're on the ground. So minimise that exposure as much as possible. So initially, and it was certainly as part of pre-deployment training, certainly when you got into country there, everyone was well aware that the high risk, or not, if not extreme risk, of hitting an IED, and that's borne out by the number of people that we have had. When we tend to focus on, and rightly so, on the killed in actions from IED, combat forces in particular, engineers, clearing those, but the unknown figure, and I don't have it, but the unknown figure of wounded in action is incredibly large from those IED experiences. So that's a long way around saying, when you first are encountered with scenarios like that is rolling out of the gate of TK or a forward operating base or patrol base, something or other, faced with that knowledge and the practical scenario that there's a fair chance you get an IED, or there's a high, or the threat is high, it can be psychologically crippling. So it's a matter of how do you approach that? How do you grip it up? So, and I think the only way you can do that is one needs to look inside themselves. I guess they've got to revert back to their training, realise why they joined the Defence Force. They've got to reaffirm why they're in Afghanistan or wherever else, defending Australia, and you just got to crack on with the job at hand. I'm not even sure if that's called courage in itself. I know it's called focus. In my case, it was certainly focus. All I did was focus on my training and focus on why I was there, and knowing that the scenario wasn't going to go away. And it never occurred in my mind to refuse a task, or to not accept a task, or to try and avoid a task. It was just literally to crack on. And I think what happens after a while, and I guess in line with those IED threats, I had a very near-death experience where, as a pathfinder, I was leading Commando Bushmasters in at night up a very large feature, and I was doing it over and over and over, leading packets of vehicles, one or two at a time, up a very steep gradient, over and over and over. I guess extremely fatigued on night vision, and I had a bad incident where I rolled the vehicle, and I rolled the six-wheeled ATV. I had to throw the vehicle. Attempted to dismount it and throw it as it reared up on me like a bucking horse, reared up on me, tried to throw it, and I went backwards and rolled down the hill. And that was fine. I thought that wasn't badly executed, until I could hear the ATV coming down after me. I could hear it. Someone was halting and coming down, and it rolled over me. And I remember it first going over a sharp point of the bike going over my ballistic plate, and thinking, wow, that's either going to crack the plate and pierce my thoracic cavity, or it's just going to crush me, which it didn't. And things at the time, but this time does slow down. So I remember having this amazing clarity to be able to explore the pros and cons of what might happen in a split second, what was going on, like literally considering 2 or 3 courses of action of what could happen in that split second. And then I remember obviously going over my helmet, cracking part of my MS, something out of an MSA Gallup ballistic Kevlar helmet, and then it rolled my face and across, I guess, the gravel and dirt on the desert floor. And I remember thinking, wow, it's just, for want of a better term, it's just degloved me, or it's defaced me, it's taken my face straight off. So I remember the first thing I did was feel my face, see that I still had a face on my skull, on my face, that is, the bones. That was still there, so that was a win, I thought, straight up. And laying there, I literally thought I must have had, given the intensity and the weight of that, and the violent nature of that bike going over me, I thought there was no way I couldn't have life-threatening internal injuries. Must have happened. So I ended up getting I waited to ensure that we didn't, compromise that mission that night. I requested that we delay Helo Kazovac until after the mission was executed, so that the incoming airframes wouldn't potentially compromise the operations. So fortunately, my request was obeyed, and that Kazovac didn't happen until a couple of hours later. But I guess where I'm going with this is, I think when you experience, and we could talk about a number of other incidences, and as I said, there's many other personnel that could talk at more depth about it and with wider experiences. But I think what happens eventually is you start to become numb, and it's certainly, and again, I'm not a psychiatrist, but I think it's part of the body's or the human psyche. It's part of the human psyche's defense mechanism to start to shut down. And when I say shut down, I mean shut down emotion and reaction to it. You become numb and you become almost indifferent to it. And I know that I did. I started to become indifferent to it, and not reckless per se, or maybe borderline reckless, but I literally became indifferent to what was occurring around me. That is the dangers, and I was certainly becoming numb to what was going on around me, in the threats and dangers. That is, and what I found conversely or alternatively, which may seem counterintuitive, is that allowed me to actually gain more clarity and be more focused. So I wasn't being hindered or experiencing that partial crippling of my thought processes through fear. Fear had mostly been replaced by numbness. And the only thing, if I wasn't feeling nothing, I was feeling excitement. That's about the only feeling I could get, was excitement. So, and that leads into, I guess, behaviours around post-traumatic stress or mental health, is those experiencing, I guess, chronic post-traumatic stress or acute mental health moments, or a combination of both. They are numb to a lot of emotions in life, or become that way. And I think they tend to start to resort to reckless behaviours to obtain that excitement, because it's probably one of the only feelings they do feel in those moments, or when you're going through those periods of your life.
It's interesting you say that, mate, because I've had a few veterans on who, my latest podcast that's just come out he was a British veteran, and he came to he basically said that he thought he was going to die over there, and he processed it. He'd come to that realization that this is it, and he said it, and it took me a minute to process, because he said I got comfortable with it, and it sat that I'd accepted that I was going to die in Afghanistan, and from what you're saying is, had you contemplated that yourself, that you were like taking those risks, but you contemplated that you were comfortable if you were to die on the back? Like, did you have that feeling yourself?
Look, I'd have to say very close to that. I don't think I don't think I'd come to a realisation that, or the certainty that I was going to die, but I certainly felt there was a high chance of that, and I developed, I guess, like I was saying, indifference to that. What I do remember at the time, and I want to be very careful how I express this, because it relates to at least one case that I'm aware of, that's highly emotive. Of course, it's highly emotive to all concerned, all military personnel and his family. That there have been personnel that have had relationship issues whilst overseas, and that's the last time or the last place you want to be in combat, doing combat operations across the other side of the world, and start having marital or relationship issues. That's the last thing you need. You need to be able to leverage off the strength of your homeland, and that begins. The homeland begins at home. That is your family, your mum, dad, your wife, your partner, your children. And if you feel like that's falling apart, you feel like your power base or your fundamental base of strength is being removed from you, the thing that you're actually leveraging off, or the fulcrum with which you are gaining, you're weaponizing the strength that you have in you. And at that stage of my life, I was having extreme relationship issues, as was another close mate of mine at the same time. We were both sharing together, and it both ultimately ended up going thoroughly south, thoroughly pear-shaped for both of us. More so for him in the short term, but certainly me over the short to middle term later. And I think, and I was making phone calls home 30 minutes or 60 minutes before I was meant to roll out the gate on a military operation, and I was copping, I won't say I was copping abuse, I was certainly having negative relationship discussions and having to get off that phone, put the phone down, feeling absolutely gutted, feeling drained of that fundamental strength I'm talking about. And then it's like a bad movie. You've got to walk into the bathroom, wet your face, look in the mirror, like we've all seen those bloody the anti-hero and all those movies, bloody the Rocky movies. Wet your face, look in the mirror. Who am I? Who am I really as a man or as a person? And somehow you've got to find the strength to get on that bike or jump in that truck or walk out that gate and execute your job. And it's not easy, and it takes an incredible amount of strength. And I think it served me better later in life. And I think that perhaps some of the experiences I had as a child growing up certainly then helped me on selection, helped me at moments like this that I've just spoken about, having to roll out the gate after having a gut-wrenching conversation with your partner, a negative one that is, and then dealing with mental health crises or incidences later, is that sometimes the only thing you can do is put one foot in front of the other. And you can always do that unless you've got your legs blown off, and then surely you can crawl and put one hand after the other and drag yourself along. In other words, you've got to keep moving. And if you have no other formula or method or strategy in place, what you can do is just put one foot in front of the other. Because what I've learned over time is that, what I should say, time doesn't heal all wounds in my mind, but time does mitigate all wounds. So if you put one foot in front of the other and keep moving forward, the scenario is going to change. It's going to morph. If nothing is constant, what is constant is change. So if you can keep moving forward, and it's through a really horrible scenario, statistically speaking, the chances are you're probably going to move into a spot eventually that's, at worst case, slightly less horrible, or maybe tolerable. Dare I say it, good. So you've got to keep moving forward, I think, mate, and that's, I think that the mechanism that I used is just focusing and just putting one foot in front of the other.
And we're gonna talk about that later on down the track as well, and the mental, how you use that in your recovery to transition to where you are now. And on that deployment, mate, did you lose anyone on that trip?
Mate, no, we didn't. Luckily enough, no one within our force. We came extremely close, but we lost no one. Luckily, fortuitously enough.
Mm. And I just did I quickly looked up that 263 Australians were wounded during Afghanistan. So, as you said, to move away from the gaff to the helo insertions, 263 Australians were injured during Afghanistan, the campaign.
And I'm interested to know how many of those were operationally wounded as a direct or indirect result of IEDs.
Of course, yeah, of course. And so you come back from that, mate. You finally got you've got your deployment to Afghanistan. Are you coming back going, I want more, or what's happening when you get back to Australia?
Most certainly, and I think it harks back to what I just said before. If when you're, and again, remember, or I shouldn't say remember, in my experience, mental health issues don't always manifest as the proverbial image we have of a poor person in the corner of a darkened room with their knees drawn up to their chest, sucking their thumb. That's not how it manifests with all people all the time. Sometimes it manifests when you are under stress. It brings out the very best in someone. It allows them to focus and do the job needed in high stress environments. So I guess coming back from that, I wasn't feeling a hell of a lot of emotion anywhere except excitement. What I could feel was excitement. So that space I was in at the time, as I said, was causing emotional detachment from all people around me, and it was causing reckless behaviours, which I now know was most probable, or certainly were, self-defence mechanisms. And these reckless behaviours, the emotional detachment, it causes errors. And without going into too much detail, I remember doing the most ridiculous things like ripping up left-hand lanes, or I probably shouldn't go too far into it, mate, but just absolute reckless behaviours behind the wheel of a vehicle. But at the time, feeling completely confident in my own ability to navigate any scenario that would present itself to me. but simultaneously looking for those exhibiting those reckless behaviours to experience excitement, to feed the adrenaline, to feed that post-traumatic stress beast, that thing that requires, that monster that requires adrenaline to survive.
Because at that point, you've been compartmentalizing everything that's happened up until this point, and so you're starting to do some reckless things, and you looking to get back over to Afghanistan again, I'm going through the notes here, and you exited the AFP in 2010. What made you transition out of the AFP? Was it that you wanted to deploy again, or what was it, mate?
Yeah, I came back from that deployment we spoke about and immediately started to, I guess psychologically at least, or psychologically I'd had very little skin in the game with the AFP for a couple of years by that point. I was working both roles, and it seemed to work well insofar as my youngest daughter was in Brisbane, so living in Brisbane allowed me, in theory at least, it didn't turn out that way later, but in theory at least, it gave me access and time with my youngest daughter. But also, so that was the AFP piece, kept me in Brisbane, gave me a well-paid, somewhat relevant job in Brisbane. But then I could also tag out, or with this alter ego that was in Special Air Service Reserve. I could tap that person out and also go across to Perth and train and do some work there and potentially deploy again. And what I should say is after after I arrived back home in 2010, due to that bike rollover, I had two severely damaged shoulders. So I had to have both my right and left shoulder reconstructed. So that took me offline operationally with the AFP, but it also put me through a period where I got one done and then the other done. It took me out of any operational mode, be it military or police, for at least 10 months. So we're now leading into somewhere around, or probably a little less, somewhere around August, September, or September, October 2010, which coincided with the next rotation that one commander were doing in Afghanistan again. So I started lining or posturing myself to go on that deployment. And that had two prongs to it. One had me somehow trying to convince the AFP to release me to go on that. But two was to bullshit my way past Army Medical. That I was only, dare I say it, only 10 weeks out of left shoulder surgery and reconstruction. And I remember having an interesting conversation with an RMO in Gallipoli Barracks in Brisbane. He wouldn't upgrade me. And I said, look, I'll get down on the ground now and get you 100 push-ups straight up. I'll show you. And he goes, mate, I'm sure you could. And then you'll walk out and your shoulder will fall off. Because I've no doubt that you'll do what you need to do in front of me to bullshit your way past me. And I know you're capable of that. But I have your long-term and greater interest at heart here. So whilst I was running those parallel colours, one of convincing the AFP to release me, and two, fooling Army Medical in time to be deployed late 2009, they both sort of reached a dead end at the same time. Army Medical refused to clear me to deploy. Around the same time that the AFP said, I actually, you know what, my memory fails me. I actually think I managed to get around Army. I think I convinced them that I could deploy somehow, even after that exchange with the Royal Medical Officer at Gallipoli Barracks. But the AFP then decided that they'd had enough of what I was doing, that they required a federal agent, not a person that was just on the books deploying with Special Operations Task Group. And they didn't say no to me, but what they did is effectively place that many administrative hurdles in front of me that it delayed me so much that I couldn't meet those hurdles in time to deploy.
Yeah, right. So then you make the decision to transition out, and that's the first transition for you, and you're still cracking on. But did you feel, as you said, you're still green. You were doing the blue roll as well. Did you feel that at that point you struggled with that transition, or it was just cracking on and keep going with the army?
Yeah, all right.
So you transition, mate, and then you mentioned In 2012, you hit rock bottom, and mate, I know this is a very hard topic to talk about, and mate, I appreciate you sharing. So, mate, talk me through that rock bottom moment in 2012.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. Look, with time, it's getting easier to talk about, and more importantly, it deserves to be, well, not deserves, it should be spoken about. I'm exiting the AFP around late 2011. I went and served briefly, or did my protective service detail or close protection in Kabul, Afghanistan, looking after diplomatic members over there. And what was becoming apparent to me, obviously firefighting in and out of Afghanistan and back to Australia, what was becoming apparent to me then was I use it, I guess I said it before in this podcast, and it's not a new term, but or phrase, the counterintuitive nature of what was occurring in my life, and that is when things were calm, some might call boring, sedate, that is everyday life, I was on edge. I was a cat on a hot tin roof. I didn't know what to do with myself. I was engaging in reckless behaviours. Again, I guess looking for adrenaline or something. But then when I was back in Afghanistan or doing reckless things or things that were dangerous or that were potentially life-threatening, it was when I was actually, as I said, counterintuitively, was when I was at my most calm, my most focused, and I felt most at home. So, never having been addicted to drugs myself, but having heard stories by drug addicts, that sounds like something out of stories that they talk about. That it's counterintuitive. You need that experience or that substance, in my case, dangerous environments, to make me feel calm, to make me be focused. Without that additive to my life, I was jumpy, on edge, dislocated psychologically, emotionally, and emotionally. I had no emotion, but certainly psychologically and mentally, I was dislocated and felt uncomfortable. I couldn't blend back into. I found it very hard to focus in normal Western society in Australia. So that led to and look, the lead up to this was whilst the pressures, I guess, of a military and police career and paramilitary career even had contributed to mental health issues in my case. Let me also say that's not an excuse either. It's just potentially a reason why I was experiencing these acute mental health symptoms. What wasn't helping, we spoke about Matthew Locke's KOA, that was like an evil imp on my shoulder daily. And I've got to be honest with you, mate, there's not a week, if not a day, I still don't think about him. I don't have intrusive thoughts, and they're not unwelcome, but it's probably not normal. I would think somewhere near, what are we talking now? Something like 18 years ago? Has it been 18 years? Wow, 7.5 years ago now. I don't think it's normal to be having intrusive thoughts. That is often thoughts about him in that scenario, but be that as it may, that's how it is. So that there were these things occurring. There's everything I've talked about, but it also, which I think there's a guy out there called Jared Purcell that does a podcast on this about fathers being alienated from their children and so on.
Yeah, the Broken Fathers podcast. Yep.
Yeah, that's it. And I was being denied. There's no other way to put it. I'm not denying any individual person, not accusing any individual per se, but there's no doubt that the scenario was denying me access to my younger daughter. Over this period of time, I was living a high-stress lifestyle. I had the full military, police and paramilitary background experiences that were starting to take effect on my psyche, I guess, and the unending tempo of that over decades, but also the fact that I was being denied access to my younger daughter. And during this time, I had to go from the period of, let's say, 2005 through to 2000, I think as late as 2015 or something like that. I went to family court 3 times, and the last 2 times I was self-represented. And they were drawn out, emotional, battles through family court. All three of those I ostensibly won, if there's even such a thing. And what I mean by that is I got the desired result that I wanted, which was access to my daughter. But we all know there's ways and means. There's ways and means that an opposing person or a person can still deny you or obstruct you from seeing your own flesh and blood. And that's what was occurring. And that was having an incredibly deep and impact on me and was scarring me to a large degree. So I guess all of this led me to, again, not an excuse, but just a sequence and timeline of events that led up to an incident in 2012 where I had an incident with police and went within a hair's breadth of going to prison, I think, and maybe for some serious time as well. I guess luckily on my behalf, the police themselves saw the scenario for what it was and decided not to prosecute my sentencing as hard as they could have done, and that allowed me to, I guess, to avoid any prison time whatsoever. But I was very lucky there, to be sure. What occurred then is, of course, is an even greater downward spiral in my mental health. Obviously, in my mind, what I'd done is, at that point, there's no doubt that I wanted to be dead. Suicide ideation, sure, whatever that means. Did I actively attempt to do so or in my life? Probably not, except through self-harm and self-abuse, that is, through alcohol and again, more reckless behaviours. But what I felt like at that time, Adam, is that I'd created an event or been in an event where I'd done something that was so adverse to anything I'd ever done in my life before, but also, and I'm talking about a violent act, nothing of any sort of nature apart from a violent act against nothing of a sexual nature or anything like that. Just violent. It felt like I'd created an event and been involved in an event where that was so adverse to anything I'd ever done before. It was something that I'd always stood against. It's something I'd always tried to defend my own society against. And somehow, and I was very hard on myself. I didn't give myself any excuses. I didn't look for reasons. I just bloody accepted it, and processed it. But that didn't make it any easier. That in fact, it made it worse. Well, not worse. It just I definitely explored that scenario for a number of years. In that I contemplated on it hard. I ruminated on it hard. I punished myself, and rightly so, hard for it. I then spent as much time as I could, and still am, in trying to atone for that one incident. And it's amazing how you can live a life of service and predominantly distinguished service, good service. And in one instant, in 30 minutes or 15 minutes, one incident can blow that whole reputation or career out of the water, at least in my mind. And I figured at that point, what's the point of going on? Because how can I possibly, one, I've engaged in something that is so contrary to the person I am. So how do I accept that? How do I justify that? How do I balance the scales with that in my own mind? So how do I come to grips with it? And if I can come to grips with it, can I move forward? But more importantly, I need to atone. And how do I atone? How do I make amends or atone for what I've done? And is it even possible? And so I started to think of, well, once I came to grips with it somewhat, and again, this took years, I'm talking 2 to 3 years, of getting out of bed each day, not knowing how I was going to move forward, except put one foot in front of the other, one foot in front of the other. And I remember some days all I could do was do 10 to 1 sets of push-ups, 5 by 10 sets of air squats, some stretching exercises, and just somehow exist from sun up to sunset and go to sleep again and then repeat. And it happened for a couple of years, and that's all I could do was put one foot in front of the other. And as I said, I was looking for ways of atoning and making amends for what I've done. And it's funny, at some point there, I think 4 to 5 years later, I felt I'd started to make amends. I certainly atoned partially, and maybe I never will completely, certainly to myself, but I've certainly made amends, and I've certainly turned my life around and started to repay the faith that people had in me. Because through those dark hours, there were many nights of the long knives where all the toxic people came out of the woodwork and tried to have their bloody pound of flesh, as they do. But in those darker hours, you really learn who your true friends are. And those people that stood by me, it was very important to me that I made amends to them and justified their faith in me by moving forward in a positive fashion. And perhaps, like some kind of crazy phoenix from the ashes, I could actually emerge an improved version of what I was prior to that. And in particular, that is, as I said, my friends, family, and my children. But like we've been talking about, I guess, off air, Adam, I think at some point I felt like I'd started to pay my dues. What I did know is that I'd punished myself more than anyone else could punish myself. I'd been punished by, I didn't escape scot-free. I'd been punished by the criminal justice system. I had been punished. I punished myself extensively. But what I found is that there were certain people in my life, and directly and indirectly, who that scenario had nothing to do with them, but they decided they'd go out of their way to make it have something to do about them or with them. And they wanted their pound of flesh, and they wanted to punish and repunish after the fact. And I'm talking 5, 6, 7 years later. And like I was saying to you on off air again, is that when someone's lying in the gutter and you've been knocked to the gutter, or you're lying down at your last moment, a good Samaritan might stop, pick you up, and help you. They might not. You well expect someone just to walk past, look at you, and keep going. What I didn't expect necessarily was people I didn't know that well, or people I did know well, go out of their way to stop and metaphorically put their boot on my throat and hold me down.
And they took satisfaction and gratification out of that, didn't they?
They do. They take pleasure in stomping on your thoughts, your deeds, and they have this perception that I think people get in their own mind what they think you deserve. So I've been punished by the military, by the way, as well. I've been punished by the military justice system. I've been punished by the civilian criminal justice system. I punished myself, which is probably the worst of all three of those, and yet I was still having toxic individuals come out of the woodwork, wanting to punish me a 4th, 5th, and 6th time, and through the same systems. People attempting to punish me a second time in almost like a double jeopardy scenario, trying to re-punish me again through the military justice system a second time for exactly the same offences, which I found incomprehensible, to be honest. And it's not a great insight into human nature or some elements of human nature.
It's something that you and I have spoken a lot of, mate, and my story is very similar. Doug, you know it too, that I was bullied, severely bullied to that point, as you know, and a lot of listeners know, where I decided to end my life too. And, you know, it's almost, you get to the point where you go, you know what, I'm done. I'm done with these bullies. I'm done. Like, no matter what I do, I'm never going to escape them. And you surrender. You surrender to what you're feeling, and you feel that you can't go on. But I know that if anyone listens to this, Doug, as both you and I have done the work since, that it does get better. The dark days do end, and the light does come. And for you, it came again, and it's come for me as well. And what was that like, mate, for you finally taking back, you know, as you've mentioned, the basically taking that boot off your throat and taking your power back?
Well, I think, and I've been quite outspoken here, but I think it needs to be. I think it needs to be spoken about. I mean, the opposite of stolen valor is people accusing or taking delight in attempting to degrade, belittle, or point out and amplify someone's misfortune, or holding them down, as I said, when they're in a dark place or a negative place. What I've found is that and luckily I would like to think it's the smallest percentage of society or humanity or people, but it's their action towards you is largely due to some kind of organic feelings of incompetence or irrelevance themselves, that they feel that they're irrelevant somewhere in life or what they're doing, or they feel some kind of level of incompetence, or conversely, in an attempt to hide these incompetencies or an attempt to become relevant, that they will attack you. So what it's done for me is one thing you mentioned before about surrendering, and I fully appreciate what he's saying, and I understand, and unfortunately that people surrender to the point of self-harm and even suiciding. One thing I've always been as a fighter, not necessarily a good fighter, but always when that bell goes, I'll come bouncing out of the corner every time, be it the 8th round, be it the 200th round. And when people push me, they will get a fight. They always will. So again, counterintuitively, every time someone tried to stick their boot on my throat, I'd grasp that foot and turn it sideways and break it where I could, using a metaphor again.
Of course.
So I wouldn't say it negatively empowers me, because no one wants to be in those scenarios. No one wants to be motivated by toxic negative behaviour. But one thing it does, again, it's a different manifestation of putting that one foot forward. I won't be pushed backwards either. And I remember thinking, like having an inner dialogue when people were trying to, and I remember one or two instances in particular, when someone was trying to hold me down, i.e. the metaphorical boot on my throat. I remember thinking, you're not going to win. You're not going to have the result you want here. As in, you're not going to make me implode. You're not going to make me go backwards. You're not going to belittle me here. And this is where it gets even more strange, is that some people, or at least they were verbalizing as such, because you refuse to back down, were then interpreting that or verbalizing that you were refusing to acknowledge the gravity of what you did, or you weren't making amends, you weren't atoning for what you did. Basically, you're not sorry for what you did because now I'm trying to hold you down and you won't let me do it. Therefore, you're not sorry.
Yeah, it's interesting, mate, because I know what you're saying, because for me, the greatest joy that I had was to take my power back from the bullies and, take it back to go, thank you, I've now got my power back. And like you now, I am a different person, and I don't allow anyone to stand over me or take that from me anymore. I've worked so hard to get it back, and and like you now, I have become a fighter that, and speaking metaphorically, I will fight now, and I won't let people walk all over me. And it takes a lot of time to build that up, and for you, it took time and support of the right people, and I know that myself. I had the right support as well, and friends that stick by you remember, and also family, and I had that as well. And for you, your military, so you have that incident, your military career does continue, and you do a bit of, and I thank you for sharing, mate, because I know how hard that is to share and be vulnerable to share to the world. So I really do appreciate that and the courage it takes, mate. So thank you. And you move on to, so you do some supporting roles as a sniper supervisor for the ARA sniper course. And was that the start of like getting that purpose back again that you sort of felt that you'd lost before that point?
Look, it did, mate, and as I said, those years and decades of I guess, I've been injured quite a lot as well along the way. So decades of mental, physical trauma, the absolute gut wrenching buffeting I took over custody and access to my younger daughter, all of these things which I guess culminated in that incident in 2012. My one saving grace or a vehicle to come out of the darkness was the army. And I've said this to a few people, is a few people that rubbish institutions like the police are poor, stuff the police, or, look at the army's terrible, or, people that denigrate institutions. isn't, mate, there's nothing wrong with institutions inherently or organically. Institutions that perform poorly or going through a poor place are normally doing so because of culture, and culture is caused directly by individuals. So if someone has a problem with an institution, they need to realise, think back and think hard. It wasn't the institution, it was individuals that did it. There is people to blame. It's a human resource each and every time. Human resource causes the culture issue, causes the institution to be poor, bad, or indifferent. So there's nothing wrong with any institution per se. It's individuals and it's human beings that do that. So, and I experienced that in the police. I experienced it in paramilitary roles. I experienced it in the military, like I guess we all have. But what the army did for me, because I was still a reserve at this point, and being an SS sniper and an army sniper supervisor, gave me the ability to be somewhat of a training gun for hire. That was be a trade testing officer or a employment category testing officer for regular army snipers in the Royal Australian Regiment. So, and that was the one thing that gave me focus, got me out of bed from, say, 2015 onwards, and started to give me feelings of self-worth. But once again, but more importantly, it was a major catalyst or part of what I was saying before about atoning or making amends. I can now be a servant in the process of bettering the Army sniper capability. So they were long, hard courses, sometimes back to back. They weren't fun, they were a grind, but it was my way of giving back to Army and trying to make amends in some way for what I felt I needed to make amends for after 2012. And I ran a number of courses over that time I've lost count of them actually, for 6 RAR, 8, 9, to a lesser, 6 RAR, 3 RAR, to a lesser extent, 8, 9 RAR. And it was an absolute pleasure. Not so much the grind sometimes, but the quality of young person I met within the Australian Army and training them as snipers was unbelievable.
I noticed, mate, I'm looking at the notes that you've sent through to me, and so in 2019, 2020, you lived in Scotland, and mate, we both have a love for cricket, and you work for Scotland Cricket, mate. What was that like? That would have been a different experience because it's not police, it's not military, and it's your other love that you love. So what was that like for you?
That was nuts. It was nuts, Adam. I think that's what the US commander said at Bastogne when he called upon to surrender by the German commander. Nuts. When I was a young fellow, ages probably 9 through to around 18, 19, being a cricket tragic, I dreamed of playing cricket for Australia. Like, no doubt you did. And
of course.
the kids did. But then later on in life, or later on in that epoch, I also dreamed of doing a professional season or semi-professional season of cricket in the UK. That never occurred. I joined the Army instead. But what I thought here was going to Scotland. I thought, perhaps I can, in a quasi fashion, I can relive this dream. And I reached out via a network, an online network to Cricket Scotland, and just randomly saying, look, I'm coming over to Scotland. Are there any cricket sides that are interested in a middle-aged man who bloody has played his best cricket probably 20 years ago? And someone reached out and said, mate, I need a semi-professional, or what they call an overseas semi-professional. It didn't get paid, an overseas amateur, they were calling it. So I didn't get paid per se, but I came in the books. Each side in Scotland and indeed the UK, I believe, is allowed one semi-professional and one overseas amateur. And I was the overseas amateur, insofar as amateur, not getting paid for it. So I went over there and we went over my wife's ticket. That is, she got posted to Edinburgh with her job. I quit the job out here because why wouldn't you, as I saw it. And I ended up playing for a club called Edinburgh South, which was a 100-year-old club with a rich history. And most people are probably unaware, given Scotland's somewhat junior status on the international stage, how popular that game is. There are multiple clubs that are over 100 years old. There's a rich history of cricket in Scotland, And when I got there, I was initially wasn't working. So I was playing, and even when I did start working, I was playing cricket 4 or 5 times a week. So I was playing an eight-a-side version of T20 cricket, probably 2 nights a week. I was playing Saturday and Sunday cricket, and I was playing what they call cup games. So it was summer in Scotland there, the sun doesn't go down sometimes till around 9:30, 10 o'clock. So you get in a cup game, T20, starting 6 o'clock, over by 9:30 at night, and it's still daylight the whole time. So I was playing upwards of 3 to 4 games a week, sometimes 5 or 6 games a week. Much like a young semi-professional guy would, going over playing for a minor county side at 18 years old.
Mate, that's unreal. And you're playing on some beautiful pitches over in Scotland. Like there's some absolutely beautiful grounds, and that absolutely, mate. What that's an easy decision. Absolutely. See you, Australia. I'm going to play a season over there, and so that you have that experience, mate, and then you come back, and then you do your final transition out of defence, and this is where your life takes a bit of a turn, but a positive turn, in that you go and study to do your MBA. And what was that like, mate? Because you'd been a police officer, you'd been in the army. What made you want to go and do your Masters of Business?
Well, just to finish up that cricket piece, mate, even before the MBA, is we're just talking the playing bit by pure, well, I won't say by luck, but by networking and a bit of thin disguised cronyism. One of the guys I played cricket with, or my skipper, was on the board of Cricket Scotland. So I ended up working for Cricket Scotland as well.
Oh, wow.
Being paid by Cricket Scotland to be around cricket, and I'm playing cricket 4 or 5 times a week as well. So it was a boy's own dream, even though I was far from a boy at that stage. But to the MBA, mate, initially, why I did the MBA was it had very little to do with, as selfish as it sounds, mate, it was a bucket list. As simplistic and selfish as that sounds, is I wanted to prove to myself that I was intelligent enough to knock a degree off, and not only that, do a master's degree, or a master of business administration. And so part of it was that bucket list item, 1. 2, to prove to myself, i.e. set a challenge and accomplish it. And 3 was to rewire my mind. I was acutely aware I wanted my life to be more diverse and have more of a kaleidoscope of experiences and achievements. And one way to do that was to reset my mind, was to literally throw myself into the deep end, knowing that if I went to a university, there are certainly a diverse range of political opinions there, certainly demographics, a diverse range of racial students, racially diverse, racially diverse, I should say, ethnically diverse, culturally diverse. So it was one way to really throw myself in the melting pot of what is, let's face it, normal society, and rework or restructure the way my brain process things.
And talk me through that, mate, because that, like, you're going back to school later on in life, and you've really been military and being a police officer. What was that like? That would have been a challenge.
Look, it was, and the most practical challenge straight up was I was working full time as well.
Oh, fuck.
Maintain work-life balance with children and my wife, my long-suffering wife, God bless her. But it was difficult. But what I found initially, I did my MBA through the University of Queensland and through a scholarship presented by the ex-service organisation called Wandering Warriors, which does pretty good work. So when I entered the UQ campus, there's a smattering of ex-military people on this scholarship doing the MBA program. So to UQ's credit, we were treated respectfully and welcomed quite warmly. But certainly the first course, I thought, or first subject, I thought I wondered what I got myself into. It was such an alien environment. Not so much the nature of how it was presented, but the level of information I was having to process, and the electronic system. So the tech, the educational tech I was meant to learn and and master fairly quickly was quite challenging.
As it would be for anybody, and and you love a challenge, so working full time, doing everything that you're doing. So you finally in 2023 you pass and you get your MBA, and I would think, mate, that would be a proud moment for you as well as joining the military, passing selection, and that would have been a proud moment for you because, as you said, selfishly, it was something. It was a bucket item list, and that would have been a proud moment.
I would use the word satisfaction, but I guess it's the same thing. One man's satisfaction is another man's pride, and vice versa. I was incredibly satisfied, relieved that the 3 years were over. 3 years ago, sometimes hell. And when I say hell, I just mean the workload was extreme. But I found successful completion of that program was aided by all the processes and lessons I'd learned in the military. And one of those which you can never usually substitute is hard work. So there's no doubt that there's times I would have done 3 or 4 times the amount of work to achieve the same result as those more talented than me. But the fact remains that I got the same or better result through hard work. But also the processes of planning and execution the military teaches you, breaking things down, again, dare I say, one foot in front of the other, compartmentalise. If a 3-year MBA seems too overwhelming, don't consider it. Don't consider it. Put it in a box, put it on the top shelf in a dark space right in the corner, and just think about the day ahead, the day tomorrow, and the next goal. And summation of multiple goals or many goals become a major goal in the MBA.
Absolutely.
Certainly very satisfying, mate. That MBA belonged to as much to my wife as it did to me. Through her support, her making allowances for me, her picking up the slack or doing, I guess, a greater share of household duties or tasks, that is, around the house. That MBA belonged. She sacrificed as much as I did, so that MBA belonged as much to her as it does to me.
Absolutely, and mate, behind every great man, there's an even better woman. So, I've been privileged to meet your wife, and she's a lovely, lovely lady. So, hats off to her as well. And, mate, for you, the willingness to continue to serve hasn't left you, and you volunteer for Disaster Relief Australia, and unfortunately, you guys are about to get smashed by a cyclone up there, so you could be needed again, mate. But is that the new purpose now for you? Like what you like giving back, and still that purpose to serve, and disaster relief gives you that purpose?
Mate, look, yeah, I guess I volunteer. I'm a founder, as you know, a founding director of the Army Sniper Association.
Correct. Yep.
This organisation. I volunteer for Wandering Warriors, and obviously I'm a volunteer member of Disaster Relief Australia also, as you said. So I guess the juxtaposition of the continuing desire to serve the veteran community, plus the fact I've completed the Master of Business Administration, and I'm now doing the Australian Institute of Company Directors course. The melding or joining of these two, I guess, spheres leads me to a place now, apart from volunteering, where I'd like to use the commercial and corporate knowledge I have and the fledgling experience I have in a corporate sense, in some kind of profit for purpose or social enterprise, where I can use the business now to further the cause of the veteran community.
Absolutely. And for you, mate, and I look forward to watching this space. And, mate, we've got a few final questions before we wrap up the podcast. And, mate, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your 18-year-old self, and would he listen?
Gee, does any 18-year-old listen to a 54-year-old, mate? If they're on a sniper course, perhaps, because they've got no choice. But, look, what I would say is life is a series of choices. and you are the product of your choices, and that there's no greater wisdom than that line which I sort of heard put with absolute clarity recently. Where you are in life, who you are, and where you end up are a product of your choices, and that is not chicken before the egg. That's literally how it should be. So I would say to my 18-year-old self, have fun, live life to the fullest, but be aware that every decision is a fork in the road. We can go left or right, and there are consequences, good and bad, to every single decision you make. So if you've got time, have fun, but if you've got time, just ensure you do your very best to make wise decisions. But be kind to yourself too, because we're all human and we make mistakes.
Absolutely. Great advice to any young player out there, Doug, and what you've been through and experienced in your life. It's great advice for any young listener that listens to that. And yeah, I'm a few years younger than you, but I often think, well, what would I say to my 18-year-old self? And yeah, it'd be very similar. So, mate, great advice. And mate,
Don't take a backward step like we spoke about.
No,
don't take a backward step like we spoke.
Exactly right, mate. Exactly. So, mate, what advice would you give to anyone, one, thinking about joining the military or police, and also what advice would you give to any young soldier out there that is thinking, well, I might give SF a crack, and either how to prepare mentally and physically?
I think the answer to the first part of your question there is have a backup plan. So if you're applying for the police or military, have an escape hatch, because life presents you sometimes with scenarios you have no control over. Or, like we touched on before, you can make a wrong decision. You can make a poor decision and end up without that career anymore, or injured, or what have you. So have an escape plan. Don't make your escape hatch an accident. Make it a planned response to your first course of action, not ending up the way you would have liked to or dreamed of doing. The second part, I think, there was what advice would I give to people contemplating some kind of special operations career or special forces career in the military? I'd say, and I mentored a few young snipers and recon personnel through SASR selection over the years. Something I'm very, very proud of. Proud of it in their results, in their successes, having some small part to play in that. I would say to them, don't give yourself, almost in opposition to what I said before, don't give yourself an escape hatch. So you're all in. You're 100% in on this. And I mentored, as I was getting to before, I mentored a young guy not so long ago who was trying out for SASR selection, and he had a young child who was 18 months old, and his wife she was either pregnant or they were considering having a second child very shortly. And he was going to SAS selection. I said, mate, how does that work out for you? He said, oh, no, that's fine. I want to be the very best I can for my family. I said, what does your wife think about that? He said, no, she's fully supportive. I said, that's fantastic. I said, 5 days in, 12 days in, 18 days in, whatever that point is for you as an individual, you will come to a place where you'll start looking for excuses. And the first place you'll go to is, gee, I'm being unfair. How selfish am I? I'm being unfair on my wife and my young child. Geez, I'm being selfish. It's best I pull off. I'm the bigger man and the most unselfish individual if I pull off right now. So I said, that might be true or not. But the point is you need to ask yourself the question right now and get an answer to that. And if the answer is, well, yeah, that is a bit selfish, we'll pull off. Don't go on it. But if the answer is now, whilst you're well fed, you're well rested, you're in a comfortable position, i.e. your brain is firing, your mental synapses are firing at their peak. If your best decision is, no, this is what I want to do, don't let that person distract you 18 days into selection and change your mind. So have an answer for that person now and formulate that answer. Otherwise, you will use that as an excuse and you will pull off. And I found out later, unfortunately, he pulled off about day 6. And when I reached out for feedback through a friend of mine who was his father-in-law, he said, yeah, he just thought of the wife and and his child, and thought couldn't do that to him, so he pulled off. And I went, he could have saved himself and everyone a lot of heartache and a lot of time and effort if he'd have just realised that. So my point is, ask yourself those hard questions early, have answers for them. So formulate those answers from a place of strength before you go, when you're well rested, you're thinking clearly, you can see your life ahead of you. Ask those hard questions then, war game the doubtful moments, have answers for yourself to give your weakened self down the track. And don't give yourself an escape hatch. Don't go into thinking, oh, well, if it doesn't work out, I'll go back and I'll become a sergeant in the army, or I'll just discharge and join the tactical police or do something. Don't give yourself an out. Because don't give yourself a plan B, because a plan B is most likely an excuse later on.
I love that. It's great advice, mate. And you didn't give yourself, back in 97, you didn't give yourself an out, and mate, you mentally tough to keep pushing on. And I think another thing, Doug, also too, what I've noticed with a lot of either 2 Commando or SAS veterans that I've spoken to is that they say, don't just think of passing selection. Think of passing Rio, and actually, get your beret, yes, but actually be a member of the unit for a long period of time. As long as you can stay in that unit, don't just think, oh, get past selection. That's the first hurdle. Then you've got the next mountain to climb, which is Rio. Then you get your beret, and then it's after that, have a long career. And it was actually episode 97, Dan Fortune, who you know very well, said that himself. He said, my goal was, and I think he's very he did his selection 3 times, so I think he can talk about that, is that he said, I wanted to be a member of the unit. I didn't want to just pass selection and have that feeling. It was, I wanted to be a member of the unit. And I think exactly what you say, mate, have that, no plan B, but have that goal of, I want to be in the unit.
No, yeah, very wise, very true. Wise words by Dan, and I think that's a great way to approach it, because I think, I actually thought that myself. I finished selection and then thought, okay, what now? Shit, what now? Because I hadn't looked that far.
That's right, exactly. And, so any young player out there, what Doug said and what many others have said, look for the long-term goal, not just the short-term goal. So, absolutely. And, mate, looking back now, with everything that you've been through and what you've experienced, all your experience, the highs and the lows, was joining the military still the best decision you've made, do you think, looking back?
Yes, the best decision I made. And I know that now, because I only have to do a civilian job now, and then 2 or 3 times a day I look out the window and just think, geez, I wish I was out, buddy, jumping out of a helo, or I wish I was, overseas rolling on a quad bike, or I wish I was, buddy, rolling out of the back of rolling about an airland bloody job on a Black Hawk or something or other, mate. So I know that now, because I still daydream. I still daydream of doing the job again, and funnily enough, mate, I keep looking at obviously what's going on. The events in Ukraine seem to be going from bad to super bad, and things occurring to the Chinese, and it was only yesterday I started thinking, I wonder if they'd take back an old broken 54-year-old if bloody we rolled into combat ops again, and it did turn to clay, and it was serious, a quasi World War III scenario. Would they take a 54-year-old again? Probably would. If we're serious enough. So,
well, mate, I think with the US pulling support, I think it's only going to get worse again. So you might be in luck, but I think your wife would have other plans, mate, and I don't think she'd let you go. So
yeah, that would be the most unpopular decision.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you never know, mate. You never know. You might be needed, so you never know. But mate, it's, as I say, like you joined it at 17. You've had a distinguished career, and it's with the highs and lows. And as you say, you look back, and I think every veteran I've ever spoken to has said the same thing. It was the best job we ever had, and if we could go again tomorrow, we would. And for you, it's exactly the same. And mate, what are your plans going forward? So now you've got your MBA. You're the director of the Snipers Association. What are your plans moving forward into the future with your beautiful wife and your family, and also for you as a career?
Mate, my ultimate goal is work-life balance, and by that I don't mean, it's a common misconception. Work-life balance means you can work 7 hours a day and then party for the rest of it. Work-life balance in my mind is all about battle rhythm in life. So it means that it requires periods of intensity where you might work 4 weeks at 14 hours a day, but then you back off the intensity and you might do another, month of 8-hour days, and followed by a downturn in life where you might have to, do a couple of weeks at 6 hours a day. So it's work-life balance and adjusting the intensity or battle rhythm as I move forward. It's certainly about being happy, and it's certainly about making my family happy, giving as much to them as possible, and making their lives happy, and as fulfilled as I can make it within my own power, skills, knowledge, and ability. Career-wise, as I said, some kind of profit for purpose or social enterprise where I can use the business acumen, that the hard-won or hard-earned business acumen I've gained to further the veteran community. But certainly coming down to the tip of that spear is looking after the welfare and assisting, serving and ex-serving Australian Army snipers.
I love it, mate. And I think, mate, you've earned it. So you've earned the right to dictate how you live the rest of your life going forward. And, mate, if people want to get in contact with you, how do they get in contact with you?
Mate, what's the norm here, mate? They can get me via LinkedIn, Doug Sheridan, or what's the geo here? I don't want to get a 1,000 abusive phone calls at one.
Facebook or Instagram, mate, as well. I think that's the norm that most people have now. So yeah,
mate. You can certainly get me as Doug Sheridan on LinkedIn, and I'm Shero_Sierra21 or S21 on Instagram.
Yeah, no, that's great, mate. I'll put all the show links in, and that way, if someone wants to reach out and, if they're thinking about joining the Army or going the SF path, they can get in, or, how to tackle an MBA later in life, that, you can give some advice to them. And, mate, it's been an absolute honour and a privilege to interview you and get your story down for the history. And as you know, we both... and it's important, mate, because as we said at the start of the podcast, someone you serve with and a great mate of mine, the late Nick Hill. So these stories are important, mate. They're important to lock into history, and that's what it's all about. So, mate, it's just been a privilege to have you on. And, mate, I want to thank you for your service, both as an Australian soldier and also as a police officer with the AFP. And I want to thank you for what you do for veterans and first responders, and also people who are struggling with mental health. It's been an absolute, as I say, mate, it's just been a privilege to have you on. So, Doug Sheridan, thank you.
Mate, thanks so much, Adam, and I've really appreciated the respectful manner and I guess the directional manner that you've gone about this podcast, mate. So thanks for considering having me on, and thanks so much for speaking with me.
No, you're welcome, mate, and I look forward to catching up with you and having a beer soon, mate. It'll be great.
Sounds good, mate. Thanks so much for your service too, Adam.
Thanks, mate. Appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in to this episode of True Blue Conversations with your host, Adam Bloom. See you on the front line.